minutes. We're waiting for Katie to get us online. So we'll just pause for a moment, but if everyone could get ready for the meeting, we'd sure appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the Joint Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources Committee. We have had a wonderful time in Buffalo touring the fire and the forest and looking at Good Neighbor Authority and also seeing some of the historic sites here. We really appreciate the hospitality of Representative Senator-elect Crago and all of the hard work he's put in hosting us, and the county commissioners. Thank you for the wonderful meal last night, and Senator Kinski as well for providing drinks for us. We'd also like to recognize Representative-elect Conley, who is in the audience today. Welcome, Representative. We look forward to working with you this coming session. So with that, today is 9/11, and it is always a sober day in the history of our country and our state. I think we all probably remember that day with somber remembrance, and then also the day after on the 12th of September when this country united like we haven't seen in a long time. And it is my prayer as we think about this day today that we will think about how we unite this country around American ideals and principles and move this country forward as one united nation under God. And with that thought in mind, we are going to have Co-Chairman Eklund say a prayer for us today on this September 11th.
Join me in prayer, folks. Lord, we love you. This is a country where we can freely say that and believe it and express it any way we want to. We thank you. Thank you for that kind of freedom, because it's something you brought. It just doesn't come from mankind. And like Chairman Steinmetz said, we'd pray for unity. That's another thing, that it'll be sourced out of your office, not any of ours. We just don't have the strength or the character to unite like we need to. And pray that we would remember the families affected by 9/11, and we could incorporate the spirit we had back when that awful day happened. I pray for a good meeting. Pray that we can expedite it as well as we can, and that you'd be the center of it. We'd remember that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Senator French, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Representative Allred brought something to my attention last night that I think he needs to announce to the entire committee and our audience out there online. Representative Allred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For everyone in this room, the next time we meet as a joint Ag Committee is going to be on Election Day, November 5th. And so if you're close to your polling area during that meeting, you can go vote. But if you're not, you might consider getting an absentee ballot. Anyway, I just got thinking about that and thought that we all needed to know that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that reminder. Katie, would you please call the roll?
Good morning. This is roll call for September 11th, 2024. Senator French.
Here.
Senator Hicks. Here. Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator Kolb.
Present.
Senator Larson.
Aye, or here.
Representative Allemand,
Present.
Representative Allred,
Here.
Representative Banks,
Here.
Representative Conrad,
Excuse?
Representative Crago,
Here.
Representative Davis,
Here.
Representative Slagle,
Present.
Representative Winter,
Here.
Co-Chairman Eklund,
Here.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Katie. All right, and with that, we'll get started. The first topic for our consideration is temporary water use. And Anna will take us through the bill. If everyone remembers, this is a bill we saw last year that failed in the Ag Committee. It was brought to us by the Select Water Committee. We felt we needed to get a better understanding of the bill. It looks like the State Engineer's Office and State Engineer Gephardt will be online to answer any questions or help us out with this bill. And with that, Anna, would you take it away?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill is entitled 25 LSO 99, Temporary Water Use Agreement Amendments. This bill draft, as Chairman Steinmetz said, came out of the Select Water Committee last interim, but died in committee. Beginning on page 2, this bill draft allows any person to have the right to acquire by purchase, gift, or lease, the right to the use of water, which may be embraced in an adjudicated or valid unadjudicated water right for a period not to exceed 5 years. On page 3, temporary beneficial purposes exclude the use of in-stream flows, and the state engineer shall not approve a temporary transfer if it injuriously affects the water rights of senior appropriators. Upon request, the state engineer may renew a temporary transfer of water rights for successive periods not to exceed 5 years each. The total length of any temporary transfer shall not exceed 10 years. And then the owner of any permanent water right, which is senior in priority to a temporary water right acquired by any person who cannot satisfy the senior water right in full, shall have the absolute right to cause such temporary water right to be shut off until the owner of the permanent water right has had his water rights satisfied. And that's the bill, and I would stand for any questions.
All right, committee, are there any questions for Anna? Any questions? All right, seeing none. Stand by in case we have some later, but with that, we will go to the State Engineer's Office. You have probably noticed in your packet that we do have a letter from May 31st of 2024 to our committee about this bill. And welcome, Mr. State Engineer. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your schedule.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairman. Brandon Gephardt, Wyoming State Engineer. With me, I've got Chris Brown with the Wyoming AG's office. Can you hear us?
Director Gephardt, you sound like a robot. We can't hear you. Can you, I think you may be too close to your microphone or too far. We're not sure, but we can't hear you.
Just a little-
That's worse.
It's better.
It's still not good.
Well, let me see if I can change something.
Okay. Let's just pause for a moment for technical difficulties.
Mr. Gebhardt, I think you're using the wrong microphone. You might want to switch microphones.
Is that any better?
That is
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Anna. It's like you've done this before. All right. All right, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Brandon Gebhardt, Wyoming State Engineer. With me today, I've got Chris Brown from the Attorney General's Office and Jed Rockweiler. He's the Administrator of our Surface Water Division. Thank you for having us today. As the Chairwoman mentioned, we did provide our May 31st letter. This was a letter that this committee has seen at the last meeting. We just reissued it just to provide that information. I did not intend to go through it, but it is information you would have if you need it or if you have any questions for it. And Madam Chair, I did go through the draft bill, and I believe that it is very similar to the basically the engrossed version that went to the House Committee last year through that process. I want to just point out just a couple of differences that I found. The first difference that I think is maybe substantive is on page 3, line 5 of the bill. This version says senior appropriators. The engrossed version from last year said other appropriators. And I believe that other appropriators is appropriate, more appropriate than senior appropriators in that text. The next change, which I do not believe is substantive, is on the same page, line 18. Previously, that said that starting on line 18, the word subsequent was stricken. That is senior in priority to a temporary. Previously, that just said that is senior in priority to that temporary. The way this reads today, I don't believe I have any problems with. I think it is the same verbiage, probably even reads a little better. But those were the two differences that I noted, and probably the extent of my comments on the current draft as it stands, unless there are any questions.
Questions from the committee for the state engineer's office? Any questions? Well, thank you for being with us. Please stand by in case we have some questions later. As of right now, we're not getting any takers, so you got off easy today. Maybe the third time's the charm. All right. With that, is there any public comments? Public comment? Come on forward, Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'll start off with the things I appreciate about this bill. I appreciate that there is a limited time frame. You can only do this for 10 years. I hear stories of some temporary uses that have been going on for 30 plus years. Well, if you're going to do it that long, make it a permanent change. I do have some concerns about adding in the word senior appropriator. That's the only one that has to be made whole. The concern I have, and then, you know, if I'm at the end of the canal and I have 5 CFS going through that canal and I do a temporary change in use and you take 5 CFS out of that canal, is it going to be enough water to satisfy other appropriators? And I would appreciate that it would go back to all appropriators rather than just the senior ones. I think that's important in especially a temporary change in use, that all other appropriators are made whole rather than just the senior ones. You know, that's throughout, that's on page 3, line 5, page 3, lines 18 and 20. The word senior is added in there. I think it's important to keep all appropriators whole on that for the reasons that I outlined. A couple of questions that if on the temporary change in use, if I have CFS, 5 CFS water right, and I want to do a temporary change in use, can I do it on all 5? Or does it, like with the permanent change, you only get half? If you change from irrigation, for an example, if you change from irrigation to municipal use, if you have 5 CFS, you only get to change that on 2.5. Only 2.5 can go to municipal to keep everybody else in that system whole, that there's enough water to go through to keep the system working is the idea behind that. And another question I have, and this is just my pure ignorance on it, does this cover diversions as well? So that where the city of Laramie, you know, just using them as an example, they're diverting out of the Laramie River and they want to do a temporary change to leave it in the river, they're not diverting anymore where they have their ranch, where they're using it for irrigation. That would be diverting at their water treatment plant. Does this cover a change in place of diversion as well? Is it only a change in use? So if I want to temporarily change from irrigation to municipal, do I get to change my whole water allotment? And then do I get to change my point of diversion too? That's just ignorance on my part, but it's probably listed somewhere else. But those are my major concerns. But I know a lot of my members, especially in Carbon County, were very worried about, a temporary change in use, and you only have to satisfy the senior rights, that the junior rights will not have water. And I don't think that's the intent of this bill, but that's why I have the concerns about changing it to just senior rather than all other appropriators. With that, Madam Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
All right, questions for Mr. Moline. First, we'll go to Senator French, then Hicks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Moline, are we running the risk of, because those senior water rights are very protected and very valuable, I guess, or whatever the wording is. Are we, by taking senior out of this, are we making everybody's rights exactly the same? Now, I get to, I deal with water all the time. I get to junior appropriate, but are we lumping them all together and taking away the value of a senior water right?
Mr. Moline.
Madam Chairman, Senator French, no, in my opinion, no. If there's all kinds of water and there's no call on the system, everybody has the ability to take the water that they have appropriated. If the system is under call, you would still have those the appropriation dates come into play. So that if there's not enough water, the junior rights don't get water. I don't think this affects that. If there's free flowing water and there's enough water, everybody's made whole. If they're short of water, the junior appropriators would still not get their water. They would not get their appropriation. And that's the way I understand it, sir. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
All right, Senator Hicks.
So, Madam Chairman, I can help answer a couple of the questions and specific to the issue. Is it all or a portion of the water right? So if you go to page 2, line 7, I think that answers your question, or any portion thereof. So in other words, if you have a 5 CFS water right, it's that water right or any portion. So it could be 2 of that could be under an exchange, the way the statutory construct. That's what that specifically speaks to that issue. So, Mr. Chairman, the question, and I guess that on the, with the example that Mr. Moline provided about the 5 CFS, even though you may have a water right, you have no duty that you have to divert. So the scenario you described about reduction and potential impacts to a junior water right, because I take my 5 CFS out of the canal, I'm not obligated to have to divert that anyway. I don't have to divert if I'm not going to use it. And this is pretty routine, I guess, in our part of the country. When guys shut off to hay, they turn off their head gate. That's not an injury to somebody down the stream that may want to keep irrigating. It's just, you don't need your water. You can shut that off or reduce your diversion. So there's no duty that you have to continue to divert. That's wouldn't change with this bill. So my point that I'm trying to draw is that can already happen, the scenario, regardless of whether there's an exchange of use. Somebody can do that already. This doesn't change the ability of that water right holder to say, well, I'm not going to divert for these 2 weeks. That's not an injury to a junior water right holder. That's exercising their right. Says I don't have to divert my water entirely just to support a junior water right on the same system. So I just wanted to make that clarification. That the scenario you could describe could happen right now. And it happens every day in the area of my part of the state when people put up hay, they shut off or decrease their diversions because they don't need the water. That's not an injury to a junior water right holder on that canal. So I think you were inferring that if somebody did a temporary change of use, that would be an injury because that water was no longer in the canal. I think, is that what you were implying? I'm trying to understand the question.
Go ahead, Mr. Moline.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Senator, thank you for that clarification. I'm going to split some hairs with you. You are, if you have an appropriated water right, you are under obligation to divert, to use that water at least once every 5 years if the water is available. Splitting hairs with you. My concern on this is if I do a temporary change in use, and that's for the entire season, and it's temporary, it can be up to 5 years. Well, now the water is not available under up to 5 years. That could hurt not only senior appropriators, the senior ones, if that water is available, they have the right to use it, but this could hurt everybody on the system. If that water, if they don't put it into the canal and they leave it in the river and it goes downstream to be used. I understand your question, and I do understand that when you do shut off or hang, you got to get the water off so the crop can grow, so you can harvest it, so it can dry out. I understand that, but that's different to not having the water there at all. And typically, and I did not grow up on an irrigated system, but just talking to some of my members, that usually what happens, you work together, and hey, I need to shut off, I need to use, you work it out within the area. Typically that's what happens. But if that water's not available at all because you've done a temporary change in use, and you've got junior appropriators between the diversion and where this temporary change in use person is, that there could be some harm to all appropriators, not just the seniors. I understand Wyoming water law that, the senior ones have the rights, but I do have a concern that this could inadvertently hurt everybody on the system. I do understand your points are about, you got to turn it off to get your work done.
So, Madam Chairman, if I may just follow up, and so that's contemplated, even within a temporary change of use, you can't injure. That's the provision. And what I'm going to do, Madam Chairman, because this comes up over and over again, is the question I have for you is this statute's been in place since the 1960s. And so all of this fear that all this is going to happen, I'm not aware of any examples where that's happened, because if in fact there is injury, they'll shut off the temporary change of use permit. But to that end, Madam Chairman, I think just to provide absolute clarity on this issue of what happens when there is potential injury, doesn't even have to be injury, when there is a potential injury. And I have maybe have Chris Brown or Brandon Gephardt explain what happens when there's a perception that there may be injury associated with this temporary water rights. And so to clarify, but I keep hearing that all these scenarios, but this has been in statutes for 80 some years, and it hasn't happened. And so I'm still trying to understand. The reason it hasn't happened is because these temporary water use, if in fact there's injury, can be shut off. But Madam Chairman, I think it would be appropriate to have the state engineer or Mr. Brown explain what happens under these scenarios.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. That's why we kept them around, and I was thinking the same thing. So did you want one more shot at it before we go to the state engineer's office?
Yes, ma'am. I would. Thank you. Senator, the current, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. This has been in place for a long time, but currently it says, the statute says you can't hurt another appropriator. It's a pretty large change to where you can't hurt a senior appropriator. To me, that's a large change, and that's where my objection's coming in. If this is in statute, that if I, as a junior appropriator, have concerns about potential harm, I won't have any voice because I'm a junior appropriator. These are the concerns that have been brought to me. Thank you for helping straighten me out, Senator, Madam Chair.
Mr. Moline, and that would be the question I would have to you if we made the change that the state engineer suggested on line 5 and change senior to other, and then possibly even just went back to the current language in lines 17 through 23, all on page 3. Would that satisfy your concerns?
Madam Chairman, yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And Mr. State Engineer, would you like to comment on our discussion and help us navigate this important subject?
Madam Chair, certainly, and we might just tag team this with Chris Brown and myself if I misstate something. But I do think that the change on line 5 addresses a majority of Mr. Moline's concerns. I'll talk a little bit about lines 17 through 23, those changes. The intent of that change is the order in which the investigation and the shutting down of a temporary right occurs. It doesn't preclude the opportunity for a junior to make a claim that he's being injured. But what this changes is that if a senior makes a complaint that he is injured, then the temporary use is immediately shut off and an investigation occurs to determine whether injury occurs or not. This does not preclude a junior from making the same claim. The change is that the junior would make the claim, then the water commissioner would do the investigation to see that it was a valid claim before the temporary shut off. If he determines that there is still an injury, then that could still shut off the temporary. It's just an order of which the investigation occurs before that temporary is shut off or is not shut off. And I hope that helps.
Madam Chair, I might just add a couple of different things just to try to fully answer Mr. Moline's questions. The first question had to do with, well, the first question about the senior right, I fully support switching that to other. If you look at other Wyoming statutes that relate to any kind of change to an existing right, all of the injury inquiry is to other rights, not just to senior rights. If we're going to make some kind of change to an existing right, the analysis that the state engineer engages in or the Board of Control engages in considering that changes to all other existing rights. And this statute, at least under the current statute, is no different. Mr. Moline's other question had to do with the amount that can be changed, and part of the statute, Mr. Moline, is not included in the bill, but if you look at 41.3.110C, that portion of the statute explicitly states that only the consumptive use portion of the right can be changed, and it makes a simplifying assumption of 50% is going to be consumption for irrigation rights. So under your 5 CFS example, only 2.5 of that 5 CFS could be changed. With regard to the point of diversion change, I think what the state engineer's office sees is that the vast majority of these temporary applications do also include a change of point of diversion, and that request is also considered in the injury analysis. Does changing the place that water is removed from the stream, does it harm any of the intervening diversions or appropriators between the existing point of diversion and the new point of diversion? And so that is also considered as part of the injury analysis that's required by the statute on the front end before it's ever granted.
All right, thank you for that. So in my mind, what I'm hearing you say is An injury analysis is conducted before the temporary change of use is granted. And then this is on the back end. If we have an injury that was not anticipated or contemplated, then this is the process that we rectify that. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
All right, are we clear on, is everyone clear? Any questions? Representative Banks first and then Co-Chairman Eklund.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just so I'm clear, so what I understand is a senior water right can make a claim and the water's shut off and then the investigation takes place. A junior water right makes a claim, but the water won't be shut off until the investigation is completed. Is that correct?
Mr. State Engineer?
Madam Chair, that is how I interpret this text, yes.
Follow
All
up?
right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I guess what's the thinking behind that of why we wouldn't just make it so that both of them have the opportunity to, if there's a concern, then the temporary use is shut off until the investigation is completed?
Go ahead, Brendan.
Madam Chair, that without the changes, that's the way that it would operate. With the changes, it would provide a little more seniority to a senior right holder. I think that the idea, as I remember it, was that the opportunity for a junior to, maybe not nefariously, but just because he's unhappy with his neighbor or something to that effect, could just make the claim and then the temporary goes away and then the investigation occurs. The likelihood of injuring a junior is less than the likelihood of injuring a senior under the investigation. So that was part of the thinking as well. If it helps, we have prepared some text that might help clear this discussion up. I can share it in the chat, but I could also read it, that has to do with how the junior potential claimant would be considered in this. So
Why don't you go ahead and do both of those things?
Okay, I will read it first and then I will put it in the chat. But I think this could be inserted after at the end of 111 on page 4, line 4, could just insert the owner of any permanent water right which is junior in priority to a temporary right acquired by any person under this act whose junior right is injured by said temporary user diverting under its temporary water right may request in writing that the appropriate state water commissioner cause such temporary diversion to be shut off. The water commissioner shall not shut off diversion under the temporary right if it is not injuring the junior right.
All right, and we're putting that in the chat as well so that Anna will have it just in case. Go ahead, Anna.
Madam Chairman, chat is not available on our Zoom, so if Brandon could just email it to LSO or Anna or to the committee, that would be great.
All right, did you hear that,
Yes, and I
Brendan?
will
If
effort that as
we would
quickly
need
as I
an
can.
email. All right, thank you very much, because that was pretty long. But then when we're working the bill, we'll have that at our fingertips and can have it reread by staff if need be. Co-Chairman Eklund, I believe that you had requested the mic.
Yes, Madam Chairman. So the question I would have, there was a lot of concern when this failed in the House Ag Committee during session. And there were a lot of concern by the junior rights holders. And one of the questions I posed there was, what can we do to fix the bill so that everybody might benefit from it? And they didn't seem to believe there was a way of fixing it. So I'm guessing they still have concerns. Under the present system, are you able, it seems to me from your letter that the biggest deal is the certainty for the temporary water users to be able to get that right every year if necessary. Under the present system, are we having trouble doing it that way, issuing a temporary right each year so that those people have a as reliable a source of water as they can, depending maybe on how much water is available? Have we been able to work through it with the present law without bottlenecks or problems that hurt other users that might need the water?
Go ahead, Brendan.
So Madam Chair, I don't think we have any issues. We issue temporaries somewhat frequently already. The reason for these changes was the additional certainty when somebody was entering into these agreements that they wanted to protect the underlying water right, but two, a little more surety that once they have entered into this, that it provides more security than what the previous version did, I believe is the intent of these changes.
And Mr. Co-Chairman, I would add to that it also limits those extensions to a time period of 10 years, which is a change that otherwise it can go on indefinitely. So go ahead, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess a question for State Engineer's Office. The statute or the proposed statute says extensions are limited to 10 years, but that does not prohibit the person that's acquiring the temporary right from then reapplying for an additional 10-year period. Is that correct?
Go ahead. I see Chris. Did you want to phone a friend? Whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Representative Grego, I think my understanding of the proposed changes would limit the total to 10 years. The last sentence of the bill language starting on page 9, or excuse me, line 9 of page 3 says the total length of any temporary transfer, including any extensions under this subsection, shall not exceed 10 years. So I believe the intent, or my understanding of the intent behind that, is to have a maximum amount of 10 years for any temporary transfer.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So it's your understanding, because I don't necessarily read it that way, and we may want to clarify that language within that last sentence. I am reading it and assuming that you could then reapply for another temporary transfer of that water right. So what you're saying is you believe that to read, if a rancher A is transferring their right to some commercial use temporary transfer, they can do that for 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, they can no longer do a temporary transfer to commercial use B. Is that how you read that?
So
go ahead.
Madam Chair and Representative Craigo, I think if you read that last sentence in parity with the previous sentence that talks about the ability to renew, that's the way I would read it. I think what I would anticipate, and this is based on other things I've seen, you would see some modification, right? You would see a change in the parties, perhaps a change in the place of use, perhaps a change in the amount. And I think what the State Engineer's Office might expect is to get a new application after the 10 years that wasn't precisely like the previous ones, in an attempt to avoid being limited to 10 years. That's what I would anticipate.
Follow up?
So commercial user B, has a temporary transfer from rancher A, just changes the name of their LLC and continues to do the temporary transfer. Is that what you would foresee happening?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative Grego, yes, or I think we could potentially see Rancher A using different lands than they used under the original transfer and call it a new one.
All right, I think we're good on that one. Senator Hicks.
So Madam Chairman, I guess I would agree that that possibility exists, and if it does exist, somebody will exploit it. So the question is if we really want to curtail that and truly limit that, so you could just add language after exceeding 10 years for the same purpose and the same point of use. In other words, you can't just change the name of your ranch. If it's for the exact same purpose, the change of use, Corporation A from Rancher B, for the same purpose, at the exact same point of use, that would preclude that from happening, if that's what we want to do. It definitively would make it say, if you're just trying to scam the system and change a name, it would preclude you from the ability to do that. But if we wanted to, and if that's the intent, we're concerned, we could add some language to that effect to clarify. If it's the same point of use for the same purpose, that would not meet the purpose of the 10 years. You can't just game the system. Anyway, just my thoughts, if that's something we wanted to include in that.
All right, and I'm going to redirect us because we're in public comment now, so we'll be able to have committee discussion when we decide what to do with the bill. Thank you, Mr. Moline, for your testimony. Yes, go.
Madam Chairman, if I heard it right, what was suggested by the state engineer's office, that additional wording wouldn't be needed if under line 18 and line 20, if we just took out the word senior. It just made it, you can't hurt another right, period.
All right, thank
That's
you
my
for that.
point.
Okay,
If there's no other questions, I'll shut up and leave.
all right, sounds good. You said it, not me. All right, is there any further public comment on this bill? Come on down, Mr. Kennedy.
Keith Kennedy, Wyoming Association of Irrigation Districts. The last point of discussion would be the point that we would bring up. And whether we limit this in the manner that was stated earlier, or we said that a specific right cannot have a temporary change of use for more than 10 years out of 20 or 50% of the time. So that right should be used for its intended purpose for a certain amount of time between temporary uses. That would be a suggestion that I might have for this, so that for at least half of its life, it's used for the purpose for which that right was granted. And with that, I'd welcome any questions.
Questions for Mr. Kennedy? Questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, any further public comment? Is there anyone online that wishes? No one online. Further public comment, going once, going twice, going 3 times, gone. Public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill. Second.
Okay, moved by Kolb, seconded by Hicks. Discussion on the bill. Are there any amendments on the bill? Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a comment. I think Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Moline had on the length of 10 years. I think that's good, or maybe the 10 out of 20 years, because we don't, how fast things are changing in the world. We don't know exactly what 10 years from now will bring, or 20, on these uses of this water. So it's just a comment,
Senator French, is that a motion or just a comment?
just a comment.
All right, we'll take amendments on the bill. Are there any amendments? The bill has been moved and is on the table. Co-chairman Eklund, and then we'll go to Banks.
Chairman Steinmetz, oopsie. Chairman Steinmetz, I would move that on, I guess, line 5, injurious effects of the water rights of other appropriators, and we cross out senior.
So that
That-
would be on page 3, line 5.
Yeah,
We would cross out senior, or would you like to change it to other as the state
yeah,
engineer suggested?
just change it to other, cross out senior.
Okay,
and
cross
change
out
it to other.
senior, change to other. Has everyone got that? Okay. All right, that has been moved. Any discussion? Was that discussion from you? Just a second. Okay, it's moved and seconded. Discussion, seeing none. All those who would like to make that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. Other amendments on the bill? Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, I would just move that we incorporate the language that really clarifies the process as outlined by the state engineer. I don't have that language, but as he presented it, that we would incorporate that into the bill, because I think it provides much more clarity to people as to how back to Representative Banks' question, you can now read that and understand how that was going to be applied in the real world and the circumstances of a potential phone call of injury.
All right,
I would
so
make that motion.
moved. Do I have a second? Moved and seconded, moved by Hicks, seconded by Banks. Discussion on the amendment. Senator French.
Could we have that read to us again? I was trying to write it down, but I couldn't write fast enough.
All right, Anna, have you got that for us?
I do, Madam Chairman. It says, and so this would be on page 4 at the end of the bill. The owner of any permanent water right, which is junior in priority to a temporary right acquired by any person under this act, whose junior right is injured by said temporary user diverting under its temporary water right, may request in writing that the appropriate state water commissioner cause such temporary diversion to be shut off. The water commissioner shall not shut off diversion under the temporary water right if it is not injuring the junior right.
All right.
Thank you.
Everyone got that?
Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. Are there any other amendments on the bill, Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, back to the issue that Representative Crago brought up. Part of the reason that we're doing this very bill is the nature of the existing process is 2 years in perpetuity. So part of the concept behind this bill is saying that's not a temporary if you keep renewing these every year. And there was really no provision. I mean, the very limited provisions for the state engineer. I mean, he can always deny that temporary, but you have to have a rational basis to be able to do that. So if we're really intending to say, look, you can't do these in perpetuity. Now, I want people to understand the consequences of not allowing those to go on for, I think what Senator French, maybe 20 years or whatever that time is you likely might have some unintended consequences associated with that, because what the options that you leave to those people that are trying to acquire those temporary use is a permanent transfer. That's what we're trying to avoid, is transferring ag water to other purposes for municipal or industrial or commercial. But you very well could trigger a process if they can do an exchange for a longer period, but if we don't allow that mechanism to happen, what you effectively do is drive it to a situation where somebody's just going to go acquire that ranch or that farm and then do a permanent transfer. So we just need to be cognizant. Now, the other statute that I think we that we, last year is the exchange process that would help facilitate. Again, we don't want that to happen. But that duration is important, but it's also important not to do something in perpetuity. But to that issue, I'm going to propose an amendment, I think, to try to address the issue of somebody just using the temporary statutes in perpetuity by simply changing the name of an LLC or something to that end. So if we go into, I believe it's page 2, line 11, after 10 years.
Wait a
Page 3,
second. Yeah,
excuse me,
it'd have to
Page
be
3.
page 3. Okay.
line 11, after years, remove the permit or period, and then it would say for the same beneficial use at the same point of use as the previous granted temporary transfer. In other words, you can't do another succession 5 years for that exact same transfer of beneficial use on that exact point of use by simply doing something that's changing the entity. It's for the same purpose at the same location.
All right. Do I have a second on that?
As a staff.
Okay,
has
it's
a-
been moved and seconded. Anna, go ahead.
Could you repeat that, please?
So on of that would be after the period. Obviously, we'll have time to review this at the next meeting, Madam Chairman, and I'd like to have the opportunity for the state engineer to weigh on it in the language. But for right now, the language would be after period for the same purpose at the same point of use as the previous granted temporary transfer.
Okay. Did everyone get that? All right. I'm just gonna go to the state engineer's office right now. I realize you're kind of shooting off the hip, but would you like to comment on that?
Madam Chair, I do have a couple of comments and maybe a question too. The first comment I would make is rather than point of use, maybe place of use, I think is more consistent with other statute. And I have maybe a question for the committee is it seems like what we're trying to limit is using the same underlying water right available for transfers for more than 10 years. And if that's what we're doing, I don't know that language changes that. What this does is it limits the perpetual same agreement. But what could happen even under this is they could still use the underlying water right and go find somebody else to make an agreement with. And and I'm not sure what the intent of the committee is, but if the intent of the committee is that the underlying water right, if you want to limit the amount of length of time that is used for temporary purposes, maybe we can come up with some different language.
Mr. Gephardt, one thing I mean, I was under the understanding that you had to run the water out on your land every 5 years, regardless to keep your right. Does that not apply to if you change the use? I mean, how do those two things interact?
Madam Chair, I think the existing statute does protect the potential for abandonment as long as it's under one of these agreements. So.
Okay, all
as
right.
long- If it's under the agreement, that underlying right is protected.
All right. Thank you for that. Okay. Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to hit on what that last little conversation was about with the state engineer here, can you give us the background on the abandonment? How, in a short version, how does that actually work? Thank you.
I'll phone a friend with Chris.
So, Madam Chair and Senator Ide, I'll do my best just to do kind of a summary. Under Wyoming law, there's a requirement that if water is available, water right holders must use that water at least once every 5 years, or they are at risk for abandonment. The way the statutes operate is that that right is forfeited upon 5 consecutive years of non-use, and can be abandoned if an action for abandonment is either pursued by a junior right that would benefit from the abandonment, or by an action brought by the state engineer for the abandonment. So a forfeiture is automatic after 5 consecutive years of non-use if the water was available to use. An abandonment doesn't actually happen unless and until an abandonment action is brought in front of the Board of Control, and the Board of Control finds that the water right was abandoned.
All right, and I'm gonna get us back on track, or else, go ahead. If you
No, I
have
just-
one more short comment, but then we have to get back on track.
Yes, ma'am. The state engineer reminded me that under Wyoming law, if a particular water right holder has failed to use a water right for 5 consecutive years or more, if they reactivate that use before an abandonment action is brought, then you can't look back at the previous 5 years. They basically remedy the abandonment, and it's no longer forfeited and subject to abandonment.
All
Madam
right,
Chairman, just
go ahead.
one
Senator Hicks.
question on that issue, Chris, for clarification. It was always my understanding the activation was initiated by the attempt to use, not the actual use of the water right. Is that not correct? If I attempt to irrigate and utilize that water right, that resets the clock. Is that correct or not?
I think, Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, that's going to be, I think, kind of a factual determination. It depends upon what has prevented you from irrigating or using that water right. If what is preventing you from using it is so this is just an example, it's still going to depend on the particular facts. If some other water or some other person is preventing you from doing that, say legally blocking your access to the water or something, then yes, I think what you said is true.
All right, and then that's not a lot to do with this bill, so I'm gonna get us back on track. And we're gonna get back to our amendment. So the state engineer had a suggestion for your wording. Did you want to make that change?
Madam Chairman, I think that changing that from points to place makes sense to me. I didn't
Okay.
catch the other component of that, but
Okay, does, Anna, could you read the amendment back to us so we know exactly what we're voting on?
So on page 3, at the end of line 11, remove the period and insert for the same purpose at the same place of use as the previously granted temporary transfer.
All right, is everyone clear on that? Is there any more discussion? Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I guess a question for the bringer, the word previous at the end of that. I'm not sure that fits in because we're talking about the same temporary use. Just a thought or question for the bringer.
Senator Hicks.
yeah, Madam Chairman, it's clumsy and that's again, this is to get this as a placeholder that we can work on this and give everybody more opportunity before the next meeting. But I agree, it's a little clumsy the way it's currently worded.
All right, okay, so we are voting on the amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. Are there any further amendments on the bill? All right, seeing none, we are going to vote to move the bill forward to the next meeting. Do we need a roll call on that or just a voice vote? All right, all those in favor, that way we can work on the language a little bit more because our water rights are so valuable. We want to make sure we get this exactly right. So I'm tasking if the state engineer's office can come up with better language next time, or anyone on this committee, please bring that to the next meeting. All those in favor of seeing this bill move forward to the next meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion has passed. Thank you, everyone. For that, we are on schedule 5 minutes ahead of time, and we will go to the Wyoming Department of Agriculture next. Thank you, State Engineer's Office. We appreciate your help on that, and we'll see you next time. So we'll go ahead and we'll have the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and then after this topic, we'll take a short break. Welcome, Director Miyamoto. We appreciate you being here today. First topic, we'll have an update on our meat inspection issues, and then we have some processors here and possibly online as well that we will take at the same time on that same topic before we proceed to the Rangeland Health Assessment. So go ahead. Welcome, Director Miyamoto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning. Again, Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Agriculture. And with me today, I have the manager of our Consumer Health Services Division, Justin Latham. He will be primarily presenting information regarding our efforts to increase communication and streamline some of our processes with regards to meat processing. And then for our Rangeland Health Assessment Program updates, I have Chris Wickman with me, and he is the manager of our Natural Resources and Policy Division of the Department of Agriculture. So, Madam Chairman, just for some background and kind of some opening comments on our efforts regarding the meat program, starting there. We have had a couple of meetings with some of the processors, primarily with custom exempt processors and processors that operate under state exemption, trying to see if there's a method that we can increase our effective communication about regulations and also about process, particularly around the topic of label approvals. And the reason that one is so complex and difficult is that the penalty for failure on labels is extremely high. If we don't get that process correct, it can result in a recall order if it's misbranded or mislabeled, and that can be financially ruinous for whichever processor happens to be a victim of that type of regulatory action. We really want to avoid that. And so we've been working hard trying to listen to the feedback that's come in, criticism about our process for approving labels, and Justin and the staff of the Consumer Health Services Division have undertaken an initiative to try to streamline that process and then also provide answers to the exam, so to speak, and give all of our processors the exact same checklist that we've developed for our inspectors so that everybody knows these are the things that we're going to be looking at for these label approvals. When it comes to the meat program in general, when I started with the Department of Agriculture back in 2015, our audits with USDA were not going very well. And so there were findings as part of those audits that were concerning to me. And again, the penalties for failure on that are very high. If we lose our state delegated authority for that program, we can't provide inspection for those processors, and that prevents them from legally being able to submit those products into commerce. So obviously that's a big penalty if we get it wrong. So at the time when I started, our audits were not going. There were a lot of things that USDA wanted to see us do with a little bit more specificity and thoroughness than we were doing at the time about record keeping and just process in the plants in general. And so at that time, my charge to the staff was that we need to make this program the highest priority and make sure that we protect the delegated authority of the Department of Ag as it relates to our state meat inspection program. And we've worked hard on that. And as a result of that, we just got done with an audit, a federal audit a couple of weeks ago. And we've been able to turn that process around, and we had a clean audit. And we're doing much better on the audit side of that, recognizing that we're still trying to also make things as clear and provide as much helpful input as we can for our processors in order to achieve the highest levels of compliance that we can. So I would say this, a lot of the change in the Department of Ag in this meat program are demands that I've put on the staff. The expectations have changed. And I have asked that program to be run tighter than it has in the past. And so all of our inspectors have this charge that they're trying to keep to make sure that we perform very well in these audits. But that also means that we might be regulating tighter than we did in the past. And so that can create some rub on the other side of the equation with some of our processors that are operating. So I will take the blame for any of that. We needed to get those audits to a better place, and I think we've done that. Justin's got some information through PowerPoint about our meetings with processors over the past several months that he would like to provide, and he can introduce some of the initiatives that we've undertaken to increase our communication and streamline process for label approval.
All right, thank you. And Justin, welcome. We appreciate. So I do want to tell you, thank you for having those meetings with us. There were some folks on the committee that attended those meetings as well. Representative Davis, I think, was at both of them, and Senator Ide and some others of us that attended those, and we appreciate it. And I think there's a level of frustration on both ends because it's kind of a catch-22 with the federal government. And yet I think we can find some innovative solutions to try to, even though we have to meet this requirement, not make it cumbersome in how we do it. And so I think those are the kind of the upgrades we're looking to make in the future, is that I don't think people are not wanting to comply. I don't want to speak for them, but I think it's just how much time does it take them and how much time out of their day and staff time and all of that. So the ease of doing business. And so we appreciate you guys and what you're doing and running our process. And so with that, Justin, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to start off and just describe a little bit about the meetings. So we had the original April meeting.
We can't hear you very well. If you could just slide that closer. Thank you.
So the original meeting was designed as a listening session. We felt like it was a good opportunity to hear some concerns that we may not have been aware of prior to that meeting. In attendance were approximately about 5 of our state or custom meat plants out of 42 across the state. We had a June follow-up meeting. Approximately 6 state or custom plants joined that, members of the committee. That was more of a two-way conversation in which we were able to provide some of the why behind the regulations or what we do as far as departmental procedures, as well as identify some misperceptions on both sides. So there was 4 main areas of concerns that were identified out of that meeting. Those would be communication, licensing, consistency, and labels. And I'm going to speak mostly about labels today, but I'll touch on those other topics just a little bit before I move into labels. What we heard from our facilities was the label review process was too cumbersome. As the director said, one of the justifications for why the current processes came about was due to an audit that was had prior. And also that FSIS has restructured how they do our on-site inspections. So now they have the compliance and investigation division come in with our normal FSIS on-site auditors. So where we may have only had 1 or 2 auditors before, what we generally see is we have about 3 or 4 auditors that come in and look at the process. Those CID or compliance investigation division inspectors are primarily looking at retail exempt processes, and they've really focused on labels because at the federal level and in other states, they've identified that there's a gap there and it needed to be tightened up. So we left the meeting in June feeling like we had a good positive direction forward. We had some tangible action items that we could continue looking deeply into, one of those being the label review process. As far as communications with our facilities, we were able to describe how we address upcoming changes or issues that might roll out that would affect our small meat plants. One of the major challenges in Wyoming is that all of our meat plants are very small. The regulations are really designed to be for larger meat plants where they have a lot more staff that can set in and have individuals specifically assigned to tasks such as the label review process. But as far as communication, what we do is we provide newsletters, emails, memorandums for any upcoming changes, and then we do the follow-up with our in-house inspectors as well as reviews. I can't put enough emphasis on our in-house inspectors and how important they are. They're really that main source of communication. At our state meat plants, oftentimes those inspectors can be in there at least 5 times a day, providing that communication, giving feedback, and giving direction to our meat plants. One of the other areas that was brought up and we addressed as far as communication was HACCP plans. HACCP plans are a very difficult task. It's a requirement for state meat inspection or federal meat inspection. And a HACCP plan stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. So to break it down or simplify it, it is a plan that's put in place with a bunch of supporting documentation and records that really ensures that the safety of a product going from slaughter through processing addresses all the safety hazards or the main point where something can go awry in that plant and cause a foodborne illness or an outbreak. So in doing so, we utilize the same records that all the plants have access to, as well as we provide classes. So we had a class of March of this year to provide that information, the documentation. But for the most part, we just Google it like anyone else does to get the information for HACCP plans. Some of the issues that we see on our end or that are common are the individuals making changes to the HACCP plan are not necessarily trained in HACCP or don't have any understanding of workings inside the plant. Change of ownership was also brought up at that meeting. And we looked at our internal processes on how we could streamline that, speed up the process. We conduct consultation inspections and we work with our on-site area inspector and we have a supervisor go in to really try to speed up and ensure that that process is as smooth as possible. We weren't able to substantiate some of the claims that came out of that meeting as far as change of ownership and wild game processing. So methods that we utilize to ensure consistency, like the director spoke about, we did have our on-site audit. Our annual self-assessment audit, and we received that back on August 7th, and it was phenomenal. We've maintained a consistent path of compliance with USDA. Other things that we do to ensure consistency and communication is we do internal audits of our staff. This is done by our supervisors. And we verify and ensure that their documentation and actions that they've been taking at the facilities is what's expected per regulation. So one of the things or areas that keeps coming up and that we verify consistency with FSIS is skinning outside. That seems to come up, and we were able to verify through our consistent process and asking FSIS that yes, skinning outside can take place, but it's got to be done under sanitary conditions. So moving on to why labels are so important. And I'm going to read you some statistics about recalled products. According to USDA, they recalled 4 million pounds of product in 2023, mostly due to undeclared allergens, and undeclared allergens are 49% of the recalls. So it's really that labeling accuracy that we're trying to ensure or maintain. We understand that our very small meat plants don't have dedicated staff that do nothing but labeling. And we have a very strong staff of subject matter experts who go through a lot of training to ensure that we provide that consistency for our plants and they have what they need. So risk of a recall is devastating. It can bankrupt some plants. I'm sure you all are aware of the recent recall of 3,600 tons of product. It's not just the recall that itself that's expensive. It can be the lawsuits that follow that recall. A recall doesn't just hurt the company of the recalled product. It hurts other companies that make the same product, or it can hurt the market. This is similar to the cantaloupe outbreak that would hurt the farmers back sometime. Frequency of changes is another area that we focus on when we're looking at labeling. We've seen at least 3 major changes come out as far as labeling this year. The addition of sesame for the Big 9 allergen was something that we heavily focused on and sent our inspectors into those facilities to ensure that our plants were compliant. We have animal raising claims, which is a new regulation that's coming out. It came out on August 28th for the notice, and that'll be moving forward, as well as updates to safe and suitable ingredients. Additional items that we look for on the labeling is going to be restricted ingredients, and those are important. Those are going to be your nitrites, nitrates, items that are put into those products that can make somebody seriously ill and cause long-term health issues. We also look at standards of identity. So certain products, such as jerky, for instance, has to meet certain standards of identity for moisture protein ratio and water activity to even be called jerky. Otherwise, it's a recall or misbranding of that product. An example, or what might best relate to that standards of identity you might be aware of, is plant-based products, or calling cell cultured meat meat. It's really that defining what a product is and how important it is. So we've received some complaints over the past about labels, and those complaints don't just come from USDA. We receive them from other facilities. So what you're going to notice is an example of a complaint on slide 4 that we received, and that was from one of our custom operators that was doing a retail exempt product and putting it out into commerce, and there was a question. Our actions on it were pretty simple. Because we had a verified approved label, we were able to respond back to that complaint from the federal plant and say, yes, that is an approved label, and we did our verification. That's where that really helps us support our plants and what we do as far as a process. So on slide 5, what does it take to approve a label? There is a presentation of a label submission. It's an actual label that's utilized here within the state. We have a committee that meets, like I said, of subject matter experts who've received the proper training as far as doing green weights and measurement of restricted ingredients. And that's a service that we provide our plants, and we do all those calculations and everything for free for them. I think there's some misconception around the label review process, especially the single ingredient labels. It's oftentimes we hear that single ingredient labels should be very easy to get approved, but I don't think people understand how complex they are. So the principal display panel on a single ingredient label is the main panel. Under that main panel, it's got to describe in large enough print to accommodate all the mandatory information. So common name, place of business, net weight. That net weight has to be at 30% of the label unless the label is certain sizes, and there's tons of exceptions, and it just goes on and on and on, especially if it has the inspection legend. And it's also required to have the special handling statement on the display, and then the font's going to vary depending on the size of the label or the number of square inches. That's the burden that my staff's trying to take on and ensure that our small plants have the resources through us to ensure their success in the product they put into commerce is not mislabeled or misbranded. We also have to verify any claims that might be on there. So due to the complexity, like I said, we have label review officers for USDA, and we have a second set that review the FDA side of things. So 9 CFR has approximately 72 pages associated to labeling, and then there's countless other hundreds of pages of guides in which we review and look at. So the next slide, on slide 6, I'm going to go over what we've done, or the steps that we've taken in the action items to try to streamline this process. So you notice on slide 6 is the markup of our old label approval application. So I was able to take that form, working with the team, and go from 4 pages and reduce that down to 3 pages and try to reduce the amount of information that's on there. We reduced from needing 2 signed copies of the label approval to only needing 1 sign. And we additionally, the facility can utilize the memo of approval, which they can get much quicker via email than having to have the main label mailed back to them and have the final copy in the plant. So those are ways that we try to reduce down the time frame from when a plant actually submits the label to the time frame that they can start utilizing it. We also created a new label check sheet. So these documents are on our website. These are not only the tools that we utilize as inspectors. Our goal is really to teach to the test. So giving the meat plants the same documentation the inspectors are utilizing so they can check the list before they even submit it to ensure that they have the most complete. It's going to reduce some of the back and forth and ensure that the label's right starting up going forward. We also updated the submittal or portal page. It does timestamp, so we know and we're tracking how long it takes us once the label's submitted to the time frame it's approved and the memo goes out as a checks and balance. We've updated our policies. We've received staff feedback and we're currently testing the updated forms and looking for any additional changes or positive improvements that we can make. With that, we've reached out and requested some feedback. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot of feedback from the plants. This is a busy time of season with game and fair and stuff like that. So we're continuing that process and opening up that communication. We're really asking for that feedback. It's key. That partnership with the plants is going to really help us determine whether or not the changes that we've made are successful or whether additional changes need to be made. And with that being said, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Justin. We appreciate that. Questions? Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Apparently it is working. I had a conversation with our local plant and he says the labeling has greatly improved. So kudos on that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that feedback.
All right, anyone else? Okay, Representative Eklund, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz. I guess the question I've got, you kind of brought it up. It's a little off the beaten track, but it concerns cultured meats. And I think eventually that would be an ag inspection. 6 months or so ago, I read an article that indicated that these fake meats, and they have nothing to do with plant products or meat products, either one, but they're able to culture beef or pork, chicken, whatever they want to do, was in a research deal and wasn't even close to being okayed by FDA. Now you see some products being cultured commercially already. And it was concerning to me that they could jump from maybe years off to doing it now. Have you had any feed from whoever, federal government or otherwise, that this might be coming down the pike sooner than we thought?
Mr. Latham?
Madam Chairman, Representative Eklund, the feedback we're hearing is mostly from the state meat directors and those conversations and how we're addressing this as a group. And what I'm hearing from that group is it's still so cost prohibitive and it's very difficult to produce in mass volumes. There were several companies that had taken an interest and have tried it, but at this time, I don't think that the research is there. However, some additional funding was provided for that and moving forward. And there is a large company, a national company that is really trying to progress that forward. So anytime that they start putting more money into that, it can really increase the speed in which that research is completed, in which that's done. I don't have any good indication on when I think that will be in the mainstream markets or how quickly that will come out. I still think that they're probably a little ways off.
Follow up?
Well, do you have any idea as to, I don't have any clarity that this has gone through the FDA. What I do know is it's being done and it is expensive, but as they do it, what concerned me was how they did it, the types of cells they were using to replicate meat. That was concerning and needs to be researched by the FDA. You're indicating the FDA is researching it, or are these private companies doing it?
Madam Chairman, my understanding is that the federal government is researching this and they're doing it in conjunction with private entities. So they're providing grant funding to those private entities to assist with the research of that product.
All right. Okay. Any further? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here today, you guys, and appreciate you showing up to the disgruntled meet guys over the last year or so. And I see that you've made some action here on the labeling, which sounds like has satisfied a lot of those folks and making things a little simpler to deal with there. I would just like to see more of that communication with the local, meat guys, the processors, and every time we come back here, show us one more thing that we can lower a regulation on or simplify it or streamline it, because that's part of our job here is to, lower regulations. And I understand you have to be in compliance and you don't want to get pressed where the feds are going to jerk away your custom exempt, but we just need to make business easier to do everywhere we go. So thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
I would really like to thank my team on this. I really do have a great team that supports this whole process and this whole program. Our label review officers have gone into meat plants and traveled halfway across the state for days at a time to work with these processors to really ensure that they understand what we're looking for and try to get it done. So I can't pass enough kudos on to my label review team and my inspectors. They're really phenomenal at the job they do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll bring up the processors at this point, but stick around, you guys, because more things could come up, and then we'll move on to our range health assessment. But are there any processors that have made the trip or are online wanting to talk about this topic? Come on forward. I know you had a long trip. Good morning. Please let us know your name and what your business is, and then go on into who you might be speaking for today and give us an update from your side.
Now we're
Push the button and pull it really close so that we can hear you and everyone online can. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is, excuse me, Alex Spring. I'm from, been sitting there too long without talking. I'm from Chugwater, Wyoming. I have a butcher shop there named Chug Springs Butchery. And I was chosen by several of the processors to speak instead of having multiple people. Our last meeting, there was some instances where maybe things got out of hand a little bit. So we kind of wanted to refrain from that happening again. But I think just to share an overall view of where the processors are at is, we don't know all of the inner workings of the USDA, what they require of the state. We're ignorant to a lot of that. A lot of us are working with the USDA, so we know what USDA requires of us. And it seems like the process that we have to go through for the state is a lot more rigorous than what the USDA requires of us. And that's one thing that's really frustrating is if the USDA only requires this much, why is the state requiring more of us? I think overall we would like to see our regulations back down to wherever FSIS requires. And maybe they require more of the state than they do themselves. I don't know the answer to that question. It feels like our businesses and the regulations were being micromanaged by the department. Just as an example, when I started my shop, Justin was there quite a bit while I was building, and he was telling me how to do this and I had to do that, and I had a USDA official, I don't remember who it was anymore. It's been 3.5, 4 years ago, but they're like, well, this isn't a requirement and he doesn't have the authority to even tell you that. And so I called Justin and I said, you're not allowed at my shop until I'm finished. And I just built the shop and, you know, I had the packet of regulations that I could follow. I followed them and Justin came and did our inspection and it was great. We didn't have any trouble. But the micromanaging, and there were some things that I was told I had to do that cost me money that I found out later wasn't a requirement. Other plants didn't have to do it. And, you know, some of the other plants have experienced some of the same things. And as far as, you know, the label review, again, it's, we had to do it with the USDA and this, even with the changes. Of course, I can't say a whole lot to the changes because our inspector, she fills out all the paperwork for us. If I had to fill out all the paperwork, yeah, I'd have to hire somebody else to come and work, and we're too small of a plant to afford that. So Sherry, our local inspector, she fills out our paperwork for us. But so I can't really speak to what the changes are there. But I do know that with the USDA, we had, you know, we filled, you know, my wife filled it out in about a day, put it in a filing cabinet. And that was all we had to do. There wasn't a review process. There wasn't, you know, right now, I think we give our inspector the labels and then they have to go to somebody else. And sometimes it can be a pretty lengthy process. We've had labels that got set to the side and forgot about and maybe that process has gotten better. I haven't turned any labels in lately that I know of, but it would, like I said, you know, we would really like to see our state program run at the level that the USDA requires, not a higher level. I don't believe that a government entity should be making regulations for my business to protect me. It's my business and I run it. If I make a mistake, then I should pay the consequences. Having another entity come in and make regulations so that I don't make a mistake, just puts more stress on us. We just don't have the time and the ability to do all of this paperwork. And I mean, just the HACCP book alone is, I mean, our HACCP book is a couple big binders that thick. I think we've got 4 or 5 of them. So I understand the review process, but I know that's another complaint from John Butler from 307 is that he keeps getting his HACCP book returned. You know, fix these 5 things and then you fix those 5 things and it gets returned again with 5 or 6 more things. And it just seems like there's no care about the processor and the money it's costing him to have to keep redoing this book or the label. You know, and it's not like you fix the book or you get the book back and your HACCP plan's back and you can fix it in 3 days. It's, you know, it's a process. And then I'm not sure what the time is with the state, but the USDA has, I believe, a month to get the book back to you. So now you got to wait for them to get it back. And then they got more problems. And it just, we've been working on the USDA process for over 2 years and we are finally through with it. But it seems like the same thing is happening with the state. But just to summarize everything again, we would just really like to see less of the micromanaging of our businesses and get the meat program back to the USDA regulations or what they require, not more than what they require.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you for taking your time and driving all the way up here this morning. And we do have a question for you, Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sir, can you give us an example of yourself or anybody else that the state is an additional requirement and what kind of cost that something specific that USDA says this is good, but the state is requiring this and it cost me 10,000. Do you have a specific example?
Go
Well,
ahead.
the label, sorry. Madam Chairman and Senator French, the label review process is one. I know with the USDA, and again, I don't know what USDA requires the state. Maybe they require them more, but just from working with USDA and the state in our plant for the label review, especially for single ingredient labels, we just make a label according to what their requirements say. We put them in our filing cabinet, and it's available for the USDA inspector to come look at. And that's all we had to do. When it comes to cooked products and the restrictive ingredients, then I think the label process is probably close to the same. Except I think they can do them in-house. And I do want to say with the label, we changed our label machine, and we did have to completely go through the whole labeling process again, except that our local inspector Justin did allow our local inspector to approve them. So I do appreciate that. Still was several hours of work, but so that is one example where it takes us a lot more time. And it's something over top of what the USDA requires. But again, maybe the USDA requires the state to do it different. I can't speak to that.
Senator Colt.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Specifically, you mentioned that you had to expend more money than you thought was needed because of a difference in potential. I guess I'll just say the way somebody interpreted a regulation. Do you have the specifics? Because frankly, I think we need to know. I'd like to know exactly what happened so we can deal with it. Because, I understand your frustration, but do you have any more specifics, or could you get them about what exactly happened? So frankly, so at least I could understand it, or could you help me out in understanding what happened precisely? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead if you have an answer now, or you could always email that to us as well if you have specifics as far as some of the ways that you feel we could streamline regulation on the industry and make it more of a partnership than that has always been our goal, for it not to be adversarial, but that we're all working in partnership for the benefit of the consumer. Nobody wants to make their customers sick, and no one wants to get afoul of the USDA. So I think it's a great partnership. We have an opportunity to strengthen in the state of Wyoming, and I think that's our goal. So are there any further questions? Would you like to answer now or later on specifics?
Madam Chairman, Senator Kolb, yes, I would like to. I can share a couple personal experiences. Again, I'm supposed to be speaking for everybody, but I don't know what everybody's experiences have been. But I can share a couple from my experience when I was building my plant. One in particular, Justin came in my plant and I was putting in my freezer. And he told me, he asked me where I was going to drain my water from the condenser. And I said, well, I'll run it out in the ground like everybody else does. And he told me I couldn't do that. I spent $2,500 trying to set up a system so that that water could run into a drain. And, you know, we're talking -18 freezer. You know, it takes a lot to keep that water from freezing. And then he showed up at my plant again and he said, well, how are you going to keep the water from freezing? I said, well, that's what all of this heat tape and everything is for. And he's like, why don't you just run it out on the ground? And then when the USDA came walking through, I shared that with them and they said, well, technically he's not even allowed to have jurisdiction over that. It's not even his place to tell you what you can and can't do. That's a building inspector. And now I'm drawing a blank. There was one more incident. Caulk. When I put up my wall panels, there was a gap at the bottom. According to the regulations, you cannot have gaps because moisture gets in there and listeria grows. And so I was starting to caulk it. And Justin said, well, nope, you're not using caulk. And you're going to have to find some other way. And so I had to go and spend money on what he suggested I get. And then it started peeling off. And then eventually he said, well, try some caulk, smooth it over, and I'll see if it's okay. And it was then. But then the USDA came in and they said, well, all of your cracks have to be caulked. Why haven't, you know, they should have been caulked a long time ago. And they said, now there's a possibility that we're going to make you take everything down and make sure there's no mold or listeria in those places because you didn't caulk them to begin with. And again, I told them, I said, well, our state inspector, the head inspector said that I was not allowed to use caulk. So that's just a couple examples that I had personally. It cost me a lot of time and money also.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep. Specifically on the defrost drain, what cost you more money there? I guess I didn't hear what was the more expensive part of dealing with. I mean, obviously you have to put defrosters on the freezer. I do this professionally, some of my things, but so I get that part. But what cost you more money there? I guess I didn't understand where the extra expense came from. If you could explain, thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kolb. So I had to redesign my drain system and add more drains in. So the plumbing cost me more money. And then I went and bought heat trace to run all the way around. Because in my freezer, I have a unit on each end. And the one end is in the middle of the building. And the other end was outside. And I would have had to add a drain. You can't put a drain in the freezer because it would just freeze. And not to mention that cold would travel down through the drain and freeze other areas. But so I had to run a drain from one side of the freezer, the outside of the freezer, where I was just going to run it outside. I had to run a drain along the inside of the freezer and PVC pipe all the way to the other side of the freezer and through the wall to get to a drain on the other side of the wall. So all of that had to be heat trace, and that's not cheap. to buy the heat trace, and I already had it and everything, and still sitting there. I didn't have to use it then. I had the PVC run already, but I just took it back down when he told me that, why don't you just run it outside? Which was good. I'm glad he came back and told me that, because it's a whole lot less headache, but that would have been the extra cost there.
All right. Committee, any further questions? All right, thank you for being here today, and please keep us in mind if you have other examples or other processors who would like to email the committee, please do, and we intend to keep a wary eye on the situation, so.
Thank you, Madam
And we
Chairman.
hope, we hope that you'll continue to have, we have the department's word that they want to continue to work on this and maintain a good working relationship and continue to improve on these regulatory areas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Senators, Representatives. Thanks for the chance to come here and share. And thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you. Do we have anyone online, Katie? John, can you hear us online? Would you like to provide public comment or comment today as a processor in this meeting? All right, we're not hearing anything. Oh,
yeah,
is he there?
Yeah.
Welcome, John. Yes,
Hello?
yes. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for everybody for this meeting and stuff, and Alex for being there. Alex and I talked about everything that he talked about. The label thing, it just costs more money. I don't know why we can't do like an exempt label that doesn't have the like state bug on it is my main concern. Like, why can't we do most of this stuff in-house? A lot of it, like, we've got product, for an example, we make a little bit of product, but we don't know if that product's going to sell or not. So if we make that product, we have to go through the whole label process and the ingredient to do that, to get a label made that we don't even know if it's going to sell to begin with, or if the people are going to like it, or if we want to keep it or whatever. There's no anything in place to say we can't do like a temporary label for that until we decide if we want to really keep that and use it, because then if you have to go through the whole label process to do this, it takes all that time, and it takes 4 or 5 months by the time they get it all situated and back in email and slow snail mail and all this. And then you got to have the label printed before you can even use it to have it okayed by them, which is it's almost a complete waste of time. And it costs, me like $300 a roll for 250 of them to have made. And it just,
the recipe, you gotta go through it again.
yeah, if anything's wrong on the recipe or anything, then you got to go through the whole process again. And it just takes that much more time. And it's just, it's too slow. It's too cumbersome. I don't know why they can't simplify that a little bit more, where it's not costing us. Plus, we don't have the time to spend back and forth. I've got 4 employees including myself, and I'm the main cutter, which has got to do everything for them. So I don't have time to sit down and redo all these and converse back and forth. Same way with the HACCP plan. I don't have time to play these games with the HACCP plan. You send me 5 things the first time I send the HACCP plan in to get it corrected. And then I was like, oh, this is cool. This should be easy. It's just 5 things. We'll get it corrected, get it sent back. I get it sent back. It takes a month. They only meet once a month. So we got to wait for them to get together and review it. And then it takes them that long to get it back to us again. And then they come back with 10 more things when they could have sent everything the first time. And we could have had it all corrected on that one. But now I got to take more time. I got to have one of my employees type everything up, go through it, fix it, and then we send it back in. It takes another month for them to get together to review it. Then it takes another month to get it back, or however long it takes to get back. So now we play these games of back and forth. It's like, if they want the HACCP plan done the way they want, why don't they write it for us and then we'll just follow whatever they want? That'd save a whole lot more time than me having to go back and forth with all this. And that's my frustration with all of this. It can be simplified. Everything can be simplified and made easier, not only on us, but also Justin's job and also his inspectors as well. It's taken too much time for them as well, and they're feeling overloaded as well, which, you know, why do you want to make a mountain out of a molehill? I don't get it. But that's my main concern. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I know it's your busy season. Do you have a suggestion as to how we might help remedy this? Sounds like we need a red tape reduction act or something.
Something needs to be, somebody needs to hold his hand or be there to help get this process done and make things simpler, besides him just running and dictating everything and trying to control the whole factor, and him just run rampant on stuff, and just, it's going to be his way or the highway, whether you like it or not. It just needs, somebody else needs to be there to help this situation out and help make things simpler and hold him accountable for this. It's just frustrating that, you know, it hasn't really improved anything. Taking one page out of that, out of a 4-page thing, does not help the process and speed it up. There could be simpler ways that it could be handled. It could be done more in-house with the label review team, especially on single ingredient labels, which it's just like, you put the label out, they could take a picture of it. It all is like rib steak, prime rib. That's a single ingredient. You could take a picture of that, send it to the label review team or whoever. They say, hey, yeah, everything looks good on the label. Could be done, could be simplified. And a lot of us are switching over to these new labels machines that print out everything for us. And we can put all the ingredients on there. So I'm kind of switching over to that because it costs me less than to go through the whole label, making the label rolls of 250. And we can put it all on there, but then we got to type all that back out, put it on that, send it in. And then we got to go through that whole label process when all we did was just retype what was on that label to begin with. That's an easy approval right there. I mean, they can say, hey, you know, as long as have your inspector say, hey, is the wording still the same thing on the other label as it is on this? Everything looks to be in order. Bam, it's done. It's approved. So that's all I got.
All right. Thank you, John. Any questions for Mr. Butler? Oh, I think we need to hear your name and who you're with.
I'm sorry, John Butler with 307 Processing and Sausage in Byron. I do apologize for that.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that reminder. We just need that for the public record so everyone knows who's testified today. All right, anything from anyone on the committee? Thank you for being with us, John. We'll stay in touch. All right. Is there any further public comment on the state meat processing topic? Anything further? All right, seeing none. Thank you guys for your comments. I'm sure the committee will have thoughts about this, and it'll give us something to mull over as far as how we move forward and how we can help the Department of Ag navigate this situation. Anything else from the committee on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to our Range Health Assessment Program. And Director, if any of you would like to address any of what we've heard quickly first and to keep us going on schedule, we're open to that as well. Or if anyone
Yes,
has
Madam Chairman,
questions.
thank you for the opportunity. Obviously, the meat processing program is complicated. We answer to a different branch of FSIS than their inspectors that come out to the state of Wyoming. But you have my commitment. We'll continue to work on trying to find ways to increase the communication and simplify that process down to where, if there is perception that we're regulating more heavily than the federal government is, we have an analysis that we go through to achieve a same as status. We go through that with USDA. We think that those are requirements of ours, and we'll double check them. So we'll just keep working. And with that, Madam Chairman, for an update for the Rangeland Health Assessment Program, again, I have Chris Wickman. He's the manager of our Natural Resources and Policy Division. This is a program that started over a dozen years ago. It was to help build the files of federal leaseholders primarily so that they could load their files with their own rangeland monitoring data. That data was committed to be accepted as part of their federal file. Essentially, the federal agencies, both BLM and Forest Service, agreed to accept the data that's derived out of this program as if they developed that data on their own. And so we think that he who has the most data frequently wins. That's the idea behind the Rangeland Health Assessment Program. And we can provide you an update on where that program sits today.
All right, thank you, Director, and welcome, Chris. We are a little bit behind schedule, but go ahead and give us your presentation and we'll see if we have any questions for you.
Madam Chair, thank you, committee members. It's a pleasure to be here and give you an update on the Rangeland Health Assessment Program and answer any questions you may have. I will try my best to get us back on track. We have a few slides. Next slide, please. Brief history. The legislature had the wisdom in 2010 to develop a new statute for us. It was 11-2-207, which basically directed the department to look at three things: to develop a rangeland health assessment program, a grant program in rules, to work with the University of Wyoming to develop educational material for this program, and then to provide $200,000 for on-the-ground projects going into the future. 2010, we completed the rulemaking process, and in 2011, we went out with our first RFP for on-the-ground projects. Since 2010, we've completed or approved 76 projects through 19 different entities. Out of those 19 entities, 16 of those were conservation districts. We've also did projects with the Wyoming Military Department, county commissioners, and University of Wyoming Extension. Through the program, we've collected credible and defensible data on over 9.9 million acres of lands across the state. The state has provided approximately $1.2 million in project funding, and the project proponents have provided roughly $1.1 million in-kind and matching funds. Next slide. So you can see our funding since 2010 has gone up and down. Currently, our standard budget has $70,000 in the program. You can see the last bullet, there's actually an additional $50,000 that came from Senate File 118 last year that dedicated the $50,000 for those producers north of Jeffrey City for a potential reintroduction of bighorn sheep. So you can see the movement of our funding over time. Next slide. The really cornerstone of this program is our memorandum of understanding. We really have three large land management agencies in the state. We have the BLM, the Forest Service, and Office of State Lands and Investments. We go out with a MOU with them that basically says that if they participate in this program, they will work with their partners as joint cooperative monitoring, and they'll accept that data, as the director said, as their own data, which is really key. We're collecting defensible, credible data, and they will use that as their data. Because it's joint cooperative monitoring, that's kind of the key to that. Agencies accept third-party monitoring all the time. But that's usually not credible to them. Joint cooperative monitoring is where permittees and the federal agencies will agree with each other on how for the goals and objectives of that monitoring system. They'll agree on the locations to be monitored, the methods to be monitored, and they'll agree that they will monitor together. That's really the key to joint cooperative monitoring, and that's why their data is basically accepted as their own. In turn, they'll use that data in decision-making processes that they're involved in. Next slide. So the overall benefits, this is really the internal side of this. We talked about that they have to have a joint cooperative monitoring. The program establishes a requirement that any project that goes to us for evaluation, all the partners have to sign off on a partnership agreement. So that means the agencies are going to sign off on it. If there's an allotment that's being evaluated, all those permittees have to sign that agreement. If state lands or other agencies or other entities can all participate into that partnership agreement. When they say that they're going to sign that agreement, they say they're going to work together and they're going to manage in the same direction for the goals and objectives or whatever that project might be. One of the key things to this program is there's really a short term, that's the project funding. We wanted to make sure that monitoring is continued, not just during the project life, which is usually 3 years. We want to make sure that when they do this, they develop a long-term monitoring plan that goes beyond the funding. So they are committing to not only working together during the project, but they're going to work together beyond that to continue the collection of data. Next slide. So really the outcome of this has been a lot. This has been a good program for our producers. Like I said, we've now collected credible, defensible data on 9.9 million acres of lands. Out of that 9.9 million acres, that's really almost broken up perfectly in half. Half of those projects have been located on BLM lands, half of those projects on forests. Out of that data that's been collected, we've seen numerous grazing permits have been renewed through the NEPA process. We've actually seen a decline in challenges to these permits that have been that utilize the grant program. Probably the best example is the Upper Green grazing allotment out of the Bridger Teton National Forest. A lot of folks might be familiar with that. It's a historical grazing operation. That is probably the focal point of contention for a lot of the NGOs. And that program, they signed the permittees, Sublette County Conservation District, and the Bridger Teton National Forest, all participated in the RHAP program. And that permit renewal was completed about 2 years ago. The good thing, the outcome of that permit renewal was it was challenged, but it was not challenged on the data that was collected, which they usually do. And it was the grazing management was not challenged because the management was directed by the data. What they were challenged on was a biological opinion for grizzly bear take permit on that. So that was really a good example of the rangeland program that produced defensible data for the federal land managers to make a decision. Couple other just brief examples is, I know you talked wild horses yesterday with the BLM. RHAP has been used to help with kind of pointing the finger at the issues with wild horses. That Northlander complex that they just gathered a month and a half ago where they removed 2,500 horses. They've done a lot of RHAP projects on that to look at the direct impact. What was the significant causal factor for rangeland standards not being met? And it came out to be, of course, wild horses are the problem. They also identified that because of presence of wild horses, that pastures are no longer being able to be used in the normal rotation because horses have taken the forage down to a threshold where cattle can no longer go on that. Another project for wild horses in the HMAs that are south of I-80, we wanted to look at the direct competition that wild horses have with our native wildlife. So they did a study to see what wild horses were foraging on. Program came out unequivocally that wild horses do compete with our native wildlife. And then during that project, the contractors actually documented wild horses actually, I'll say, bullying wildlife, pushing them off of water sources, making them change their normal species movements across the landscape due to horses' presence on there. So good things. Again, it's just another way to tell the story for wild horses. And RHAP has been a good player in that. And then ongoing work. You might have heard through different things that the Bridger Teton National Forest is one of the forests that have vacant or forage reserves on their forest, which means there's no grazing on those vacant allotments until adequate data or new NEPA has been completed. The conservation districts in those areas have identified that and have been working really hard and really closely with the forest to get new data, to get renewals, so we can put domestic sheep or cattle back onto these forage reserves or vacant allotments. So those are some of the things that are ongoing right now that are really will provide dividends for our producers. But with that, Madam Chair, I zoomed through that. I'm stand for any questions.
That was amazing. We don't like to be slideshowed to death, so that was just the right length. Thank you very much. Questions, Senator Hicks? Senator or Representative Allamon, you can go first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I understand this right, you're working on 9.9 million acres, which theoretically about half BLM and half Forest Service. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative, correct.
Where does the funding come from? Is it state funding? It looks to me like there's almost $1 million worth of funding. And I hope that that's coming from the federal government since we're working on their land and not coming from the state of Wyoming. Where's that funding coming from?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative, the $1.2 million that we funded is through the grant program to our project proponents. So absolutely. They are working on federal lands in some situations, but the federal agencies have to be a partner in that. Sometimes they provide funding, sometimes they provide match, sometimes they provide in kind with staff time. But there's no way about it. They are helping federal land agencies to do some monitoring on their lands.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So once again, is that state funding? Is $1 million coming from the state?
Madam Chair, correct.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, so just to give the committee a little background on this, this was this topic that wasn't come through the Ag Committee. It was assigned by Management Council for the Ag Committee to look at, and not just this committee, other committees. But there was some concern expressed by a number of members in the House last year about the concentration and the utilization of some of these grant programs around the state of Wyoming, and with the idea that there may be some level of inequity on how these funds are being distributed around the state of Wyoming. And so when I went through the report that you have on your webpage, I mean, I think this highlights what some of those concerns were. But I think we need to understand the nature of the program. But when I went through the website, and it's only up to 2020, so when I looked to see where the project is, obviously there's a concentration in certain areas of the state. If it's public land agencies, there's going to be more. But when I looked at it, I didn't see any projects in the 13 years of the existence of the program in Campbell, Crook, Converse, Weston. I think there was maybe one in Niobrara. I couldn't tell if it was in Niobrara, Goshen, Platte, Albany, Laramie, and there was one that was maybe in Park. I couldn't tell, it looked like Owl Creek. I didn't know if it was Hot Springs or Park overlapped. So that was the concern that was expressed by some of the members of Management Council, not just with this program, but with these grant programs that we run out, that there's just this inequity of distribution of funds. And so there's been a suggestion in the past that maybe we allocate these based on region, or we cap them some way, so we see the same thing with programs like Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund, with small water program, with water development. But what I'd like to do is, for the committee's edification and understanding, go through a series of questions with the director and Mr. Wichman as the nature as to why we see a concentration. First question is this a sponsor-driven program? In other words, you take applications for the funds, but those applications, as you indicated, could be the University of Wyoming, Cooperative Extension Service, local conservation districts, could be the federal agencies to come in and asking for some level of assistance. So your program's driven by the people who want to use it. It's not mandated that the funds are distributed based on certain entities. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator, correct. Yeah, I think the concentration and when you identify those areas that haven't looked at utilizing it, is the desire of those entities looking for opportunities to gather monitored data. And the land ownership pattern does dictate that a lot, because a lot of private landowners do not want their data to be public, those type of things. So we do see a concentration on public land, or public land areas, federal land management in particular. And Senator, was there something else?
Follow
Yeah,
up.
so, obviously, when I look at Crook County and the Black Hills National Forest, there's a substantial amount, but we haven't done any projects. So the other side of the equation is it's really kind of issues oriented driven. And so where you have potential litigious groups that tend to hang out in Western Wyoming that want to exclude livestock for public lands, there's a potential higher threat and a higher demand for the program. Is that an accurate characterization?
Madam Chair, Senator, that's correct. And I have some numbers here that show what you're talking about. So Sublette County has been awarded 19 projects. Lincoln County is number 2 at 11. Lower Wind River has been awarded 8 projects. That's mostly focused on those wild horse areas. Star Valley has 6, and Teton Conservation District has 5. That's kind of the hierarchy. And you're exactly right, Senator, that we have a NGO that resides in that forest area that has challenged all these areas. So it is based on issues that are happening on the ground. There's a lot of issues on that west side of the state that I think these conservation districts are trying to address or trying to get ahead of all the time. We also have a technical team that reviews all the applications. So we just put out an RFP that asks for anyone that's interested in the program. They have to get those partners to agree to that project. But the technical team that reviews our applications and makes the selections for projects consist of the University of Wyoming, Derek Skasta. The lead range for the BLM state office is on there. We have the forest lead for the Minnesota National Forest is on that selection committee. And the Office of State Lands is on that, and then the Department of Ag. So they look at the technical parts of that and the merits of those proposals. We rank them, and then honestly, there's very rarely do we not fund all the projects, if not that year. The next biennial they keep applying for. So almost all of them get funded at some point. But there is absolutely a hot spot of action that people are trying to address.
Madam Chairman, just one follow-up question. So, and I'm going to ask you to prognosticate just a little bit on here. So if some of the things that have been suggested is that we would cap the number of projects that an individual entity could sponsor, or we constrain the amount of money and then we try to distribute it at quote, and I don't equitably around the state. So a certain amount of this money could not be spent in those three counties would have to be spent in eastern Wyoming on public land dominant. What would be the net effect of either one of those proposals to either constrain the number of projects that a sponsor or the dollar amount, or say it just, you can't spend money on a certain side of the state? So if you would like to opine on that subject to the impact of the program, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator, I think it could be a good idea to try to engage all the different areas in the state to look at this better. We can promote it better, but these projects that are being proposed are addressing important issues to those areas that have to get done in a certain way. So if we do restrict our funds, we're at $70,000. Our program is $20,000 max per project. So we're looking currently at three and a half projects that we would try to divide up between their various regions. Not saying one area is more important than the other, but that technical team does look at the merits of what's trying to be accomplished, because they do list the goals and objectives of what the project purpose is. And so that technical team does review that to say, this is a high priority for the forest. They say that and identify that, and that goes into that selection process. Director, is there anything else?
Go ahead,
Madam Chairman,
Director.
Senator, I think, for the history of the program, we have tried to take on hot button areas and specific issues, and also trying to help lay down precedents in some cases where you have a very contentious relationship for allotment management, and there might be a specific problem that we're trying to address, but it just seems like challenges seem to hit the same federal land management agency offices over and over again. And I think that's why you see a lot of repeat applications for certain areas. With the amount of money that's in the program today, I would rather not see, an allocation by region, just because I think we're going to have to prioritize very carefully going forward with the amount that's there.
Thank you.
All right.
It would have, so if I can characterize your statement, it would really limit the scope and the ability to program when it was achieved to set up. Is that accurate?
Madam Chairman, correct, Senator.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any further questions? Senator Larson.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. I'm kind of confused. I guess the funding was talked about $1 million. So is that over the 13 years? Is that what I'm hearing?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Larson, correct. That's over the duration of the program since 2010.
Yes,
Hello?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. So annually, it's the 70,000 plus maybe some other funds that might go with that, maybe about the same amount.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, our standard, it's in our standard budget of $70,000 for the biennium. So that three projects would be for that biennium, but it's in our standard budget currently.
All right. Okay, everyone good? All right. Thank you very much for making the trip up today. It's been very informative, and you did great on time. We really appreciate it. We will take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Oh, any public comment first? Is there any public comment? Public comment on our Rangeland Health Assessment Program? Is there anyone online? Seeing no one, before we take our break, I'd like to recognize Senator Barlow, who just popped in the back. Welcome, Senator. Thanks for joining us for the Ag Committee. And so we will be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll hear from our good state forester again and talk about fire response and recovery. All right, we're a couple of minutes later than expected, but we're going to get back on track here and we're going to bring several agencies up to deal with our fire and response and recovery. And we also have some affected landowners here. Welcome. We're thankful that you could take the time to be a part of our discussion today. So, oh, I needed one more chair. I apologize. So welcome back. And you'll have to share the microphone. And I think we'll let Kelly with State Forestry start us off. But obviously, we've suffered several fires all across the state of Wyoming this year. It seems a bit unprecedented to me, but maybe it is. I'm getting a head nod that it is unprecedented. But we as a state and as the Agriculture Committee want to make sure that we respond in the most productive and efficient way that we can for our producers and for our state. We understand that if we don't handle the recovery right, we will have more fuels and more invasive species and all sorts of troubles. Hadn't even thought about some of the things we might be facing under Director Budd's purview. So with that, I will let all of you take it away and give us some brief thoughts and then maybe how we proceed and can help you get this work done for the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chairman and Chairman Eklund, committee members. My name is Kelly Norris and I'm the Wyoming State Forester. Thank you for inviting me today to present to you about wildfire response and rehab. So when it comes to wildfire response, State Forestry really manage wildfire response in two different ways. We look at wildfire response as fire management, planning, and coordination, and by the actual response itself with the equipment, people, and finances once a wildfire happens. So proactive fire management, planning, and coordination is truly critical to wildfire response. State Forestry provides and coordinates wildfire training with our county cooperators and federal partners. Training is necessary when it comes to keeping our permanent and volunteer firefighters ready and prepared for the dangerous and physical mental work that is required when responding to a wildfire. We coordinate and support the tracking of all county and state resources through certifications through a system we call IQS, which interacts with the dispatch system through our interagency dispatch centers. We also support our local county fire districts through our federal access personal property program, in which our mechanics create fire packages that are placed on old military trucks that are used in the rural wildfire setting. Wyoming has a master cooperative wildland fire management agreement that exists between all major wildland fire protection agencies. And that really helps facilitate our personnel, our equipment, our services between each agency. We also have that tiers off of that is our local annual operating plans. And from those, that's where we look at all the agencies that are responsible for putting out wildfire or paying for the wildfire suppression, how we're going to interact and bill each other at the end of a wildfire. We also represent state forestry interests through our interagency dispatch center boards. We also sit on the Rocky Mountain Area Coordinating Center and with our Wyoming Rural Fire Advisory Board, advocating for all of Wyoming's fire resources. Beyond that, as the committee saw yesterday, we really focus on proactive management in our forests, developing forest management projects that are focused on reducing the fuels, not only on state lands, but on private lands and that WUI interface and also on federal lands. With that, State Forestry really helps with the planning and working with our counties to develop their community wildfire protection plans, which are truly critical to their planning and prioritizing of areas where fuels reductions are in need. When it comes to the actual response of the wildland fire, State Forestry provides support through our own resources. So as you're well aware, we have our contract helicopter and helitack crew. We have 2 contracted single engine air tankers. We have the smoke busters, which is our inmate hand crew. We do have engines, as well as the majority of our staff who assist in operations, logistics, finance, and admin. We also provide a significant amount of financial support for fire billing and suppression costs. So State Forestry has 2 fire accounts that we use to pay for wildland fire response. The first account is the Fire Protection Revolving Account. The Fire Protection Revolving Account is established in the budget to provide payment to fire protection entities for services rendered on billable fires, the purchase of wildland fire equipment, and costs related to fire protection and other fire-related activities. It can take a long time for the counties, especially their firefighters, to be paid for their equipment in time when they respond out of state. This account allows the counties to be paid through state forestry in the state for their fire time and equipment. And then we bundle up all of those bills and we send them forward to the federal agencies like the Forest Service or Colorado, and we get paid back and reimbursed in that account. That account is also set up as a revolving account for the purchasing of the equipment for the federal excess property. Currently, state forestry has 321 pieces of equipment deployed that goes to the rural fire districts. And this account really gives us the authority to purchase that. Once we build the fire package, bring it out, the counties reimburse us and to make that account whole. So the second account that state forestry is using is the emergency fire suppression account. So the EFSA account was established by the Wyoming legislature in 1986, amended in 2001 and in 2005. The program provides all counties the opportunity to join the EFSA by paying annual assessments based on statutory provisions. The cash balance remaining in the account at the end of the biennium is carried forward for future needs. When it comes to state forestry's accounts, at the end of every biennium, anything that's left over also rolls into the EFSA account. This balance earns interest based on the state's cash pool rate of return. Requests for assistance can be made from the EFSA for qualifying fires that exceed the fire suppression capability of a county. Upon meeting the county floor costs, additional suppression resources are paid upon approval by the state forester. Currently, all 23 counties are members of this account. This year, we had 16 this morning, and I'm expecting 17 EFSA fires. Each EFSA approved wildfire is required to have a cost share that's established if other jurisdictional entities are involved in the wildfire. And based on our annual operating plan agreements, we typically default to a % acreage split in our cost shares. So this year we've had some really devastating wildfires, and it's not over. Interestingly, the majority of our wildfires that we have been approving through our EFSA account this fire season has had a large portion of the wildfires burned on private lands. And that means a large percentage of the costs of these fires are going to be covered through the EFSA account. Running the data last week, so it's probably changed a little bit. Of the wildfires that have occurred in Wyoming this year so far, 75% of those lands burned are on private, with an additional 9% on state lands. And it's not just state trust lands, it's game and fish lands, Department Ag lands. So that's a substantial amount. It is hard to know the exact costs of the wildfires, as it takes a while for us to collect all the costs and the bills from each wildfire. But we do believe we have obligated at close to $30 million in costs. And that's really starting from February when we started having fires all the way through to now of this year. This leaves us approximately $9 million still in the EFSA. We recently made a supplemental request to add an additional $20 million into this account to help keep it in place where we can handle another large emergency fire situation, and hope to get that approved in the legislative session this winter. In regards to spending authority for this account, state forestry has $12 million in spending authority for the biennium for the EFSA. We completed a B11 request for an additional $20 million in early August. Things have really changed since early August, and we are going to need to be tracking pretty closely, because if we do the math, we've obligated approximately $30 million out of this account, and we've only asked for $32 million in authority. So we are likely going to be needing to have an additional increase in requests and authority in this account as the summer continues and into the next biennium, in the next fire season within this biennium. So moving on to wildfire rehab. Wildfire rehab starts immediately once a wildfire is caught and in place when it gets to a place where we can start fixing fences that were cut, pulling back berms from the dozer lines or grader lines. So state forestry staff, we focus on rehabilitation needs on state trust lands, but we do coordinate with all adjacent landowners. Typically, past large wildfires have burned on forested lands off of the national forest. So with that, this year, we've really seen a lot of these large wildfires burning on grasslands. And even though it's a grassland ecosystem, it's still going to take us time to assess the wildfire damages on these landscapes. Our staff will assess for water, drainage, and erosion issues, as well as forestry-related concerns with seedlings or regrowth needs. Assessments can take a few months, it could take a few years, requiring monitoring as conditions change and depending on what kind of weather conditions happen with snow or storms and moisture. Over the last 2 decades, State Forestry Conservation Program has created what we call wattles, which are these long tubes filled with wood chips to help control the water direction and prevention of erosion. These wattles were utilized on numerous fires, such as the Roosevelt, the Oil Creek, the Arapahoe fires, and we are available and ready to create as many of these wattles as needed onto the landscape. The Forestry Conservation Program also has completed repairing restoration and native tree seedling plantings. We have found that native Wyoming tree seed is not easily accessible or available for use. State Forestry has been developing a native tree seed collection program that will collect, extract, and store native seed in our Newcastle Forestry facility. The seed can be dispersed post-wildfire using just dispersed out, or it can be grown out as native seedling trees for the purposes of planting. Beyond the use of our forestry conservation program, state forestry staff have utilized the DEQ Section 319 non-point pollution control program to help fund needed contract work to fix erosion issues on state trust lands, specifically from the 2012 wildfires. We've contracted tree felling for erosion or have completed that ourselves. And we also assist Homeland Security and the impacted counties with similar fire rehab work through the programs Homeland Security can provide. And lastly, State Forestry has utilized the Trust Preservation and Enhancement Funds to help contract additional rehab work on state trust lands. This funding is managed through the State Land Board of Commissioners, and any funding used from this account has to be approved by the board. There is still funding left over from the 2012 wildfire rehab approved board matter that can be updated to expand for rehab needs from this fire season. And we have Deputy Crowder here who can speak on behalf of that account and provide more information on its abilities. So with that, I'm going to end my comments here, recognizing that many of the recent wildfires will have some positive impact, but also are going to have some negative impact on these landscapes. And we're committed to supporting the necessary wildfire rehab work wherever our expertise can help do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to you and your team. You have helped us all so much this year, and we really appreciate all of you and the coordination between our firefighters and our communities. So yes, any questions for Kelly at this point? Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you for that report. You mentioned that EFSA was started in 1986. What was the mechanism prior to that to address these issues? Thank you.
If you need to phone a friend or get us that information later on, because that could be a detailed question. If you don't know, it's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am not sure. What I would infer is wildfire costs got pretty expensive for the counties, and the state set aside funding to help support the increasing cost of wildland fire. But I can follow up and provide the legislature an email with details on what actually triggered that in 1986.
Thank you, Kelly. And is that okay to you? All right. Any further comments or questions? With that, let's go to Director Budd. I know we need to get him on the road sooner rather than later. So go ahead. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, and members of the committee. I'm going to talk a little bit about invasive annuals, which is primarily the focus that I'm going to take. As you know, this issue has been a major priority in Wyoming. The governor had a task force in 2020 that addressed the issue, identified it as probably the #1 invasive species issue that we had to deal with. We have, prior to and since that time, worked in collaboration with local weed and pest districts, Department of Ag, Forestry, State Lands, Game and Fish, and other entities to address and attack invasive annuals. We've also helped with UW to map where the outbreaks were and where the highest priorities for treatment are. That's an ongoing process that continues. And in this year, in 2024, Governor Gordon asked for $20 million to address invasive annuals. That includes Medusa head, ventnata, and cheatgrass, the variations on cheatgrass. $9 million of that was awarded. The other $11 million for the second year of the biennium is in my supplemental request already. We allocated $1 million of that for cheatgrass control and ventnata control in June. Since that time, we've gotten requests, and I think this is a highlight of how we do things in Wyoming. Our weed and pest districts have collaborated with each other to create area-wide entities to look at it and prioritize. So if you're in Sublette County and you have an abundance of resources, but there's a major problem in Lincoln County, they're able to share between themselves and identify the areas that should be treated first, second, third. They can identify retreatment. It's been a real game changer as far as addressing invasive annuals. They have applied to address, not even to address the fires that have the outbreak of fires in Northeast Wyoming. Those requests are $17 million. If you add the cost, the estimates for treatment in areas burned in Eastern Wyoming, it's another $12.1 million. The breakdown on that is Johnson County is $5 million, Sheridan County 2.4, Campbell County 5.7. So what that does is it says if we want to address the current demand and address this issue, which is a major priority, we're going to, this is based on the estimated acres impacted, we're going to need approximately $30.1 million over the course of this year and next to address the issue. Of that, $8 million remains from the 9 appropriated in January of this year. So the net request that I will be suggesting to the governor in the budget will be $22.1 million to make us whole on treating the fires as well as the ongoing invasive issue. Our role in that is to coordinate the funding and to build leverage with multiple partners. The work on the ground is done by local weed and pest districts. They are very well operated. They're very well coordinated. We don't try to get in their way. We're trying to get that money and bring it in. We can leverage that against the federal agencies. We can leverage that against other entities and say, look, here's what we can do. So that's what we do. The other is that we can hold that funding. As we know, this is not something that's going to be done in 1 year or in 2 years. This is an ongoing issue. So we're able to hold that money and mobilize it at the time and place that it's most appropriate. All of our state agencies have different roles, and we meet and discuss those regularly. We had a sub-cabinet meeting last Friday that all of us went through and talked about what the priorities would be. I think everyone on this panel was involved in that, and YDOT as well. So that coordination exists, and that's where we are. We're getting leverage right now on this of about 2.1. That's not where we like to be. We like to be a little higher than that, but given what you're looking at and what Ms. Norris talked about, the private acres that don't necessarily generate BLM funding or forest funding, Forest Service funding, that's a game changer. And that's something that we need to be thinking about. How do we get additional funding on those private acres? I will tell you that biologically, there's really not a need to treat anything right away. In fact, that could be detrimental. If you use Rejuvra and you go out and you treat, you're basically going to stop those natives from germinating, those natives from coming back through. So what we really need to do is what we're doing now and what the state forester referenced, and that is identify the areas of highest priority, identify areas that are probably not going to need treatment, identify areas where we have both a physical structure issue and potentially a restoration issue that goes beyond treatment for invasives. But the highest priority in the coming year is going to be to preclude those invasives from taking a foothold in areas where they have that opportunity. And so that's the, I think, number one. I will tell you that some of the funding I have suggested may become duplicative. In other words, we have a request from the Northeast counties right now for funding. They have additional funding that they're bringing in related to the fire. Some of that there's going to be overlap. I wouldn't get overly concerned about that because we also know that a lot of this one treatment is not going to do it. So the funding, if it isn't used this year, very well will be needed 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. And I will tell you that the funding I'm suggesting is strictly for invasive treatment. This does not include reseeding. This does not include any kind of physical alteration of that environment. That's something that Director Norris and others will all have to get together and figure out those areas that are going to require additional culverts, fencing, things like that. That's not in our bailiwick. Finally, I would just say that one of the things that I'm going to recommend to appropriations, and I would appreciate support from this committee, we're going to have to be a little more nimble in this case than we are with our normal large project funding. So if we allocate funding for fire rehab, we're going to need to be able to say this can be allocated independent of that large project process because we're going to want to get that out probably next fall. So if the funding comes in January, February, and then ends up in July, that money needs to be available, not waiting an entire another year. So I'll have language for a footnote in that in the budget request as well, Madam Chair. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and appreciate your time today.
All right, questions for Director Bud? Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, thank you, Bob, for those numbers. I was trying to do some back of the napkin math on this. The question I have is when you talk about the $30 million for treatment, that's an all-in cost as I understand it. And then we talked about leverage and, there's a number of programs out there. Some of these lands were BLM. Obviously, we need to coordinate with BLM. They've got money, hopefully, to be able to help spray theirs. And then even the private land programs through NRCS and some of these others. So in your view, the 30 million, as I understood, is kind of an all-in cost. What would you anticipate to be able to leverage? So if it's a $30 million cost and we had 20 million, can we leverage 10 and then you have local weed and pest districts have their mill levies to help support that. So as I understood, that was your estimate was 30 million was an all-in cost, or did I miss something? And then talk a little more about where you see us being able to go out and leverage money and get this on the ground.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, that's an all-in cost for the state. That 30 million that I'm referencing right now, based on the match that we have for the grant applications in front of us, there's a match to that. That would be about 54 million on the ground. So our 30 relates to 54. Now that number is very likely low. And the reason I say that is we don't know yet what we can get passed through from BLM, Forest Service, and other agencies. That just lets our money go further if we do. And we're not saying that we're in the 100%. The numbers on the fire rehab are very close to 100%. That's no partners at all. And the reason for that is that you've already got those local weed and pest districts are already tapped out with their budgets for what they had planned anyway. This is an additional impact, and it's such a predominantly private land system that we don't know, for instance, what can NRCS bring to bear? Well, they can't bring anything if people don't apply for the money. So you have to think about, do we amp up our ability to use EQIP funding? Do we look at other types of funding on the federal side? And I know that Director Miyamoto is working on that, partnerships with USDA, but I don't know. I think the 30 million, if you want a total number, the 30 million should end up looking like 80 million total by the time we're done.
Madam Chairman.
Follow up.
We're never done. So talk about that. When you say when we're done, is that 2 years, 3 years? I mean, we just know with these type of weeds, it's an ongoing perpetual problem that's not gonna go away. But from the perspective of fire rehab, if this is what we're focused on, what's that time horizon for we're done?
Madam
ahead.
Chair, Senator Hicks, I'll probably punt that either to Weed and Pest, Lindsay, or somebody that can give you a better answer. But the short answer is that we don't know post-fire what the effectiveness of the treatment's going to be. We have a lot of information on what it is if you go in and treat it in a irrigated field or you treat it in regular rangelands. So I think we're all a little bit at a loss looking at, okay, what do we get with fire? Is it an 8-year treatment or is it a 2-year treatment? You know, we're using numbers like 4 years that we think we can get effective treatment with Rejuvra. But we don't know that. And so I think Lindsay may be able to comment on that, or somebody from Weed and Pest may have a better idea than I do.
So Madam Chairman, before Lindsay answers, let me ask the question too, is because we all know, I mean, it's, and I say we being in the natural resource management bill, post-fire treatment management matters on how we utilize those lands. And so it gets to the question, we can end up in a scenario where we're perpetually in and calling it fire rehab because there probably or may not have been, in some cases, appropriate post-grazing management, other weed control, maybe even something non-related to grazing that has some anthropogenic impact, whether it's oil and gas or mining or future drought conditions and stuff. So I'm still trying to get my head around at what point in time is the obligation from the state stop and it shifts to the obligation to the landowner, including the BLM, Office of State Lands and Investment, and private landowners. Because we can't be responsible for the post-burn management, or is there going to be a post-burn management requirement for participating with state funding? These are questions I have as to how do we effectively roll out, be fiscally responsible for the project going forward. And so if you can answer all those in one question, that's a big question. But again, how long do you envision that we're going to be in this post-burn weed treatment management program with a heavy influence from the state of Wyoming?
Director, but you can answer that or phone a friend.
Madam Chair, I'm not going to directly answer that. I think Norris may have a better answer than I do, but I will tell you that the number that I have given you is for initial attack. That's for getting to it now. If we wait 2 years, not only does the initial attack cost go up, but the retreatment cost goes up. So that the $30 million I'm talking about is to deal with the issue in the coming year or 2 years, depending on what monitoring shows. But I don't know, Kelly, if you've got.
Or we can go to Weed and Pest if you would like. And so welcome, give us your name and tell us your position and give us the lowdown from Weed and Pest.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Lindsay Woodward. I am the Weed and Pest Coordinator with Department of Ag. And I was a Weed and Pest District Supervisor before I took this job. So I do have a little bit of on the ground behind me too. So to answer the question on the timeline for this initial time to address the fire and the grasses that are coming back post-fire, I would say 5 to 6 years. So that's time to do some surveys, time to do some mapping, do some seeding if that's necessary in places, and then to do treatments. And then after that, if there's places that need a touch-up treatment or that need reseeding after that, I'd put that all within about 5 or 6 years. For a long-term weed recovery to reclaim an area like that, most districts would probably figure that at 25 to 50 years. By the time we're addressing things that are coming in the second wave, if there's fire line scars, that's a longer term recovery for those, but those will be pretty minimal. So mostly I'm talking for initial recovery of 5 to 6 years.
Did you have a follow-up?
So And this again gets to the issue of the program. If we set this up, I think it sets a realistic expectation just from another area of the state that doesn't have a lot of grass fires, but has periodically range fires with predominantly sagebrush. So maybe think higher elevations and the checkerboard country out there. Are we then just going to set up a state program? Because once we do this here, there's going to be a realistic expectation that these type of programs are going to be available for private lands across the rest of the state. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying, while we're running out here right now and saying we need to address this issue, the issue is not going to go away. And so we need to be a little more thoughtful about this. Back to the legislature when they set up the emergency fire suppression account. Is this going to be a revolving program versus a kind of a one-time shot in the arm? Those discussions are legitimate and need to happen now with the realistic expectation that the legislature is committed to this for the long term and going to fund it into the future. What I don't want to do is, if for those that are not in this part of the state, come back in 4 or 5 years and say, well, what about us? And we say, well, the hell with you guys. So that needs to be very thoughtful. Us when we go through this program, are we setting up a programmatic program similar to the emergency fire suppression or the fire revolving account for fire rehab? And what is eligible under fire rehab? Is it culverts and road crossings when everything washes off next year? Remove the vegetation, you increase the potential for flash flooding that damages county roads and private property and infrastructure, state highways. And that's a realistic expectation that may happen with some of this. So I just say, as we're using this as an example now, we need to look forward and say how, if legislature, we're inclined to say this is going to be a programmatic thing, or are we just going to do these knee-jerk responses and every time we have a big fire, you go out there and try to address this. So again, it's more of a statement than a question, but the question is you as state agencies need to think about this, and we as legislators need to think about this as to whether we want to just do a one-time or we want to try to set up a programmatic type of approach and what that looks like. But Madam Chairman, it's something that we really do need to contemplate.
All right, thank you for that, Senator Hicks. And I would agree. I think that's why we're starting the discussion now so that we can be ready to respond. It seems things take a lot of time when you have an emergency on your hands, as we have found in Goshen County many times and other places across the state. So we're trying to get a jump on this, and we want to be of assistance and help in any way we can. And with that, Ms. Woodward, would you like to go? We have another question. Go ahead. Senator
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to pile on here. Those are the concerns I have as well, not to be redundant, but the numbers you gave us, 75% of the fires we have here are on private land. I mean, number one, do we have an obligation? Number two, is it constitutional? What other businesses fit into that category? We've got to worry about everybody coming to the trough on this and be careful with it. So thanks for letting me make a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ide. All right, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just I guess maybe a little more clarity on the leadership structure, management, and how you're going to coordinate this across the state. I mean, I heard a thing that you've got weed and pest agencies all over the state. I guess who is going to be the one to try to make sure when we get to the point of efficient allocation of resources that would do the most good in the right places? I mean, how is that actually going to be coordinated? Could you help me out with, I guess, what your thoughts might be on that?
All right, who would like to take that one? Because I think we're just starting to form this. So does anyone have an answer to that at this time?
Hey, they're telling me, Madam Chairman, that it's me. I don't have a good answer for that. state forestry looks at suppression, wildfire response and suppression. We coordinate, we help, we facilitate. It depends on the fire. And it depends on the fire needs. We're typically used to wildland fires being in timber, and that's why we've taken the lead many times, is because we're working with private landowners, we're working with the timber side. This side is definitely more ag. And so with this, I don't think there's been a one point of leadership selected yet. So it's a great question that you're asking, Senator Kolb.
So just for the community or the committee's benefit and everyone watching online, I think what we're trying to do today is kind of get our arms around what numbers we might be looking at, what the governor has tasked all of you and what your roles are so far, and how we might be able to, how we get our arms around understanding what the problem is and what the solutions might be and what we feel comfortable with the solutions being. And so with that framework, I think that kind of helps our discussion a little bit. And I think something else this committee should be thinking about is forming a working group that we can start working with you to make sure that we're addressing all of the issues from both the executive branch and the legislative branch, because we'll be, we're handling the appropriations, obviously. Not this committee, but the legislature. So with that, and where this is in our jurisdiction, we want to be helpful and yet very considerate about how we move forward and what demands we're creating on the system for the future. So I think all those are good comments. With that, would you like to keep going, Lindsay, or did you have any answers to some of those questions?
I guess really briefly, in terms of coordination and leadership with regard to invasives specifically, the Wyoming Weed and Pest Council includes the University of Wyoming and the Department of Agriculture. So discussions about large projects for the invasive side of that, I would say that leadership is going to be the Weed and Pest Council.
Thank you for that. And we'll just keep going on down the line and let Jason comment briefly and then go to our Department of Ag. And I apologize, I can't remember. Weed and Pest. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Crowder, Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. I'll be brief. What Director Budd and Forester Norris said is exactly right. And we play in a partnership with them to move forward in any type of wildfire response. I do want to make clear that fire happens in Wyoming a lot, right? This is an unprecedented year as far as the amount and how it's happening and where it's happening. But we've had fire in the past, and particularly we've had fire on state lands in the past. And as Forester Norris mentioned, 10% so far this year has been applied to state lands. And so we have a response mechanism and we're deploying that. And we're working in a partnership fashion with everybody else on this panel, like Director Budd said, under the leadership of Governor Gordon. A little bit for how that response occurs on state land specifically, because that's where our jurisdiction at the land office begins and ends, is that we first look at our preservation and enhancement account. The legislature has funded that for preservation and enhancement of the value of state lands and has done that through the school foundation account so that the actual beneficiaries of the majority of that revenue are paying back to maintain and enhance the value of their asset. We utilize that in a variety of ways. We partner with Director Budd's fund through weed management, through invasive grass management, to make sure that all of that work is done at a landscape level and it's not just piecemealed across the state, but we have a good, thoughtful response and have a good control mechanism for that. But also, in the case of a flood or some type of erosion situation, those funds can be deployed there. So it doesn't just have to be a response to wildfire management or wildfire rehabilitation. It can be for any reason. We have a large rain event. We can deploy those funds to fix and enhance the value of that asset in that way. Like Forster Norris mentioned, we've got two pieces of the preservation and enhancement account at play right now. One is something that the Board of Land Commissioners approved back in 2012 for that impressive wildfire season. $901,000 was dedicated just for wildfire rehab. And as Forster Norris mentioned, we've done erosion control. We've done grass invasive management, as well as some seeding for that. There's still funds left over, and we anticipate going back to the Board of Land Commissioners in October and reauthorizing those funds past the 2012 fire season to what we have now. Currently, there's about $605,000 left in that account that could be deployed on state lands to help in this partnership that we've discussed and move that fire rehab along. The second part of the preservation and enhancement account is $340,000 that the legislature just approved in our biennial budget. So that's for the biennium that could be used for all types of response that I just mentioned. It's important to note that that account also cleans up dumps. It also manages public recreation problems, mitigates those problems. So anything we do specific to fire rehab out of that second $340,000 has a detrimental effect on those other projects that we're doing. So the Board of Land Commissioners, as Forster Norris mentioned, reviews each one of those projects and weighs its merit to the beneficial impact to the value of that asset. I think the other thing, the second thing that we're working on from fire rehab, and it came out of the 2012 fire season, is an understanding of the impact to our lessees. Obviously, there are some ranchers probably in this room, but certainly impacted by these fires that have lost everything. The last thing we want to do is charge them a full rental rate when they can't even pay for hay, or maybe they don't have no place to move their cows. So we have a process where we'll reduce that rental rate down to $50 per section for that impacted year, going up to 2 years, and then we'll work on it on a year-by-year basis after that to see truly what is the impact the fire had to that operation, what is the need for the rest period for that particular piece of ground. We've taken a little bit of guidance from the BLM saying probably 2 years is a good rest period before you can start introducing grazing back onto the landscape. So we've done that on a case by case, on a situational basis, reduce that rent down to $50 a section. The third thing that we're doing in the office, and that's in collaboration with everybody here, is to make sure that our lessees and anybody else is aware of what options, what relief are available to them. So we're bolstering our website at the moment to provide that information back to the lessee so they can see our fire rent reduction policy. They can see that we have some funding there for fire rehab, and they can also see that there are a bunch of us sitting here and other mechanisms available for help. And we're trying to get that information out as quickly and as much as we can. Madam Chair, that's what I have. Happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Crowder. And we also congratulate Director Scoggins on her retirement. So you'll have to take that back to her and tell her thank you for her service from our committee. Any questions? All right, seeing none, let's just keep going on down the road there.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My comments will be swift. I would like to, if I could, reserve most of my time for Reese Irvin, who's the weed and pest supervisor for Carbon County Weed and Pest. They have some experience in this realm. Our connection is primarily through weed and pest. And one response to a previous question was about coordination amongst all the entities and what kind of model we might be able to put forward in order to get some implementation done. One of the vehicles we have at our disposal is through the Wyoming Weed and Pest Council, as Lindsay mentioned, and there's a committee that's developed called the State Allocations Committee that takes several different sources of funds and then allocates those to the weed and pest districts. That committee is composed of our president, Donnelly Darnell, who is sitting right in the audience there. It is the Board of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture, weed and pest supervisors, and the University of Wyoming. The way we've used that in the past is primarily using UW Extension as the technical assistance arm of what projects are going to be done at an area-wide level, and then coordination amongst the weed and pest districts for those projects that spill over jurisdictional boundaries, like many of these will in this case. So we do have a system in place that we might be able to to utilize depending on what sources of funding become available through our disaster requests that we have so far. And we're still trying to work through what the cost share rates might be for any assistance that we do get and what type of program availability might come if we do get those requests granted, but we're just not completely sure of our status on emergency requests yet. Stay tuned. We'll have more information and try to keep that updated. There also is a coordination website that's being developed amongst all the executive branch agencies to try to tie together what resources are available. But this is unique, and I don't know if I haven't been able to predict what might be able to come available as a result of these fires yet, but we are working on it.
All right, thank you, Director. Any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Reese Irvine with Carbon County Weed and Pest in Rollins, Wyoming. As Director Miyamoto stated, we do have some statewide granting agencies already set up that can help with the prioritization and look at how these funds are spent, make sure that these funds are being matched appropriately, and look at the prioritization of them. So we have some of those in place with the SAC and also WWNRT. When we get down to the individual districts, I think there's some things that the districts can do to be very helpful. In Carbon County, we've treated over 40,000 acres of wildfires since 2017. We've done a lot more cheatgrass treatments than that, but specifically wildfire recovery. And that's about $1.8 million for those treatments. And that was at a lower cost point because we didn't have Rejuva when we started those treatments. If you guys are familiar with the Mazapic, it was quite a bit cheaper, but we didn't see as good of control with it. So we now have a new tool in Indaziflam that's much more effective, and we try and use that as much as possible. But that $1.8 million all ran through the district, and the funding sources for that, we are a little bit different. We have a lot more federal land down where I'm at than what we're dealing with these fires right now. But just to give you an idea of all the funding sources that we deal with, I have a BLM cooperative agreement. I also have a BLM Good Neighbor Authority agreement. There's U.S. Forest Service agreements, both Good Neighbor Authority and cooperative. We utilized bear funds from the Forest Service, which those are forest specific. We utilized pesticide registration fee grants that come from the State Allocations Committee. We utilized WWNRT funds, Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation, Wyoming Governor's Big Game License Coalition, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Fish and Wildlife funds, Sage Grouse Local Working Group funds, state and private forestry funds, which is a grant that comes through the Department of Ag from the Forest Service. So there's a lot of funding agencies out there, places we can go to get funds, but having that central group that can utilize those funds and get them on the ground, having those agreements set up with the federal agencies ahead of time so that we can help expedite the contracting process. That's really where the weed and pest districts come in. We can also lump these projects together, bid them out as a whole. Currently, barring some NEPA stuff, we're looking at doing about 66,000 acres in Carbon County this year. And I can contract that in a relatively short amount of time. If you leave it to a federal agency or even a state agency, it takes significantly longer. Sometimes it can't be done in-house. So that's really where the weed and pest districts come in. And, if we apply for these funds through the SAC for WWNRT, and we can show those matching funds, show where everything's coming from, and then they can look at that and help prioritize across the state and look where the greatest need is currently and kind of distribute those funds. The other thing I really want to point out is in Director Bud's comments, that $17 million that was already requested, I think that's primarily somewhat preventative. You could look at it because those weren't actually applied for to treat wildfires. We're trying to get cheatgrass and other invasive annuals treated before a catastrophic fire like these happen. The ecology of wildfire and cheatgrass, in some ways, fire needs cheatgrass, especially to have these big, fast-moving fires. It increases flame length, increases rate of spread, makes it harder to stop. So if we can get a lot of these areas treated prior to having a catastrophic wildfire, it's going to pay big dividends in the end. And I think we need to look at it a little bit not as a wildfire recovery deal, but a lot of these funds are preventative as well. And that's protecting our habitat. It's protecting our sagebrush, which is very, very important as we look at these funds.
All right. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Any closing comments from anyone? Co-Chairman Eklund, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz. I guess from the Ag Committee, we just would like to thank all of the volunteers. We have a ton of them in Weed and Pest, and it's a huge thankless job. And those of you that are here can kind of relay that message from us. It's part of why we're a low tax state is we've just got, it seems like an unlimited supply of hardworking volunteers that help with the work that needs to be done, and the expenses that we have are reduced because of that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you all. We appreciate your hard work and look forward to working with you. Director Bud from Homeland Security. I saw her on the list and I was wondering why she was there, but welcome, Director.
Thank you
We
very
have a
much.
couple of you today.
Yeah, couldn't catch a ride, so, so I apologize for not being here today. I wasn't able to, I had other obligations today as well. So thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the relationship between forestry and our office and the interaction with FEMA and as an additional funding source for recovery for wildfires. We work together closely with the Division of Forestry. They are the governor's authorized representative to request a fire management assistance grant, which helps them with expenses to fight the fire. That does go through FEMA. As a result of those, which we have received 3 and at the state, our office manages mitigation funds to assist with the recovery from those wildfires. Each FMAG received, we get $985,111 in mitigation funds that requires a 75-25 match, 25 being non-federal funds. With the 3 FMAGs that we've received, that total project amount would be $3,940,000 and $444. These grants or these project costs can be used on defensible space, fuels reduction, post-fire flood prevention, and sediment reduction measures. And as I said, the 3 fires that have received the FMAGs and therefore would receive the mitigation funding would be Laramie, Happy Jack Fire in Laramie County, Pleasant Valley Fire in Platte County, and the House Draw Fire in Johnson County. According to FEMA guidance, this money for projects on the ground first goes to the area impacted by the wildfire, then other mitigation projects in the impacted area, next other wildfire activities in the state of Wyoming, and other mitigation projects in the state of Wyoming. So if the local jurisdiction that is being affected by the fire doesn't utilize all the funding, that's the order of operations for where that funding can go otherwise. And we assist the local jurisdiction with the project development. FEMA deadlines for our office to submit projects to FEMA for eligibility and approval is March 31st of 25. And then the deadlines go on from there with an end of performance date of March 23rd of 29. That kind of details very briefly that program, and we'll continue to work with, in partnership with our other state agencies, with having conversations about how we might assist with the non-federal match as a state. Otherwise, that's up to the local jurisdictions to come up with that non-federal match, which amounts to $985,111. So working on conversations there to see if we can combine efforts to assist there. In addition, our office is also responsible for federal disaster declarations, which includes all hazards, including wildfire. It's called a public assistance declaration, and that would cover damaged infrastructure that is publicly owned. State agencies are eligible applicants, as well as local government and special districts. One note is that any of those applicants must have adopted the county or state mitigation plan. That makes that very important. We as a state have to meet thresholds in order to apply for a federal disaster declaration. It's based on population. The overall losses for a threshold for us to meet is $1,078,205. Each county who is as a part of the disaster has to meet their threshold as well to receive FEMA reimbursements. That Laramie County's is 462,355. Platte County is 39,583. Johnson County is 38,856. While we can use all costs related to counties that were affected by the wildfires, if they do not meet their local costs, we can still utilize that as a cost to the state and for the disaster. County coordinators, our emergency managers at the local level, assist with tracking the losses. And at this time, the governor is submitting a request for an extension to the period of time that we have to request the disaster, as we still have fires ongoing and the ability to track all of the costs involved. It needs to be taken into consideration. This will give us a 30-day extension to request the disaster declaration, which will move it from September 20th to October 20th. And we also have the ability to ask for an additional extension after that to November 20th, should we not have a very good hold on what the public costs may be. One other challenge, and that we're working with forestry as well as the National Weather Service, is to be able to show that the fires were started by one weather event. So we'll be working on writing that story, if you will, to look at how we can bring all those together, to look at all of the fires in the area as a part of the disaster. If we get the disaster declaration, that is a reimbursement process to the local eligible applicants, which would be, again, counties and special districts. And again, that is a 75-25 match for that reimbursement as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions should anybody have any.
Thank you, Director. Any questions? Any questions? Seeing none, being last has its advantages. They're all questioned out, I think, but thank all of you for your work on this. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you, Director Budd. With that, I think we'll move into public testimony, and we have a few affected landowners here as well. We would love to hear from them today, and we're so sorry for what you've been through. We know it's been traumatic and for many of our constituents across the state. So, and Senator Barlow, come on up. All right. Well, if you could just state your name and where you're from and but
my
take
name's
it away.
Jake Christian. I'm here representing the Jack Plain Ranch. I'm fifth generation rancher here in Johnson County. And we were affected by the house draw fire. It burned about 95 or 96 9,600 acres of our 10,000 acre range. So about 96%. We lost 40 miles of fence, about 280 bales of hay, and the haystack or the yard around the hay. Narrowly missed losing our buildings. So.
Hello, my name is Megan Wells. I am with HIP Investments. I'm a landowner with my husband, Ian Wells. And we ranch just east of town here. Our ranch was in the house draw fire as well. So far with the house draw fire, we had lost about over 32,000 acres of our 38,000 acre ranch. So it's been very devastating. Of that, we've also lost 98 miles of fence. We have about 900 head of cattle that we are having to displace as of right now, and then looking forward into 2025 that we have to also displace next year so we can be good stewards of the land and make sure that the grasses come back well. We've had some death loss, and then now we're also facing several cattle being sick with pneumonia and just other sicknesses from being stressed of handling, moving. So all that death loss associated with it. We also have an increased cost to this due to labor, fencing, crews that need to come in and help us with that, picking up all of the burnt debris. We've lost basically all of our grasslands, and this has just been completely devastating for our family and added a ton of stress. And I know for a lot of our neighbors, it's been devastating. And the amount of loss that we've had it's unfathomable at times. And we have so much to do, looking forward to be good stewards of the land, to keep the ventonata away, weeds that are going to come from this, and fixing all the fence, getting the cattle in other places. We're still not sure what we're going to do next year. And we appreciate you all talking about this and putting light on this subject and all the other associations that have helped with this. But just to shed some light on what it looks like as a landowner.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for either one of these before we move on to go ahead? Co-Chairman Eklund.
Could you shed a little light on how you've dealt with the displaced cattle? Myself, if I lost all my winter grass, I'm just not sure how I would deal with that. And I think there's others of us kind of thinking the same thing. I've heard there have been some pretty successful plans in doing that, but if you can share that briefly, we'd appreciate it.
Go ahead. Madam Chair, Representative. So far we've displaced 174 of our pairs. Some of them are going to a ranch just at the base of the mountain. Majority of our cows are going to have to be shipped to Nebraska for the winter after we wean, which our weaning dates are going to have to move up to November so we can ship calves off in a timely manner to save the little bit we have left. And then we have also sent replacement heifers to North Dakota. As far as how we're going to displace cattle come springtime, that's still up in the air. It's going to be a lot more tricky finding pasture due to the acreage burned around us and calving dates starting and cattle needing help being calved. And yeah, we're not quite sure what we're going to do then.
Representative Krigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really don't have a question. I just wanted to thank both of them for being here today and actually being leaders in their community. They've not only helped themselves, but they're out trying to help all of their neighbors find solutions to problems that may not have solutions, but they're working their tails off to do that. So I just wanted to thank them for being here today and being available to the committee.
I do have an additional comment. As far as priorities going forward, I mean, fencing is our biggest priority. It's essentially open range right now for 41 miles of Johnson County. The invasive grasses is also a priority, and going to some of these meetings and stuff and finding out what that cost is it's daunting for you all to learn these numbers as it was for us. At one of the weed and pest meetings, I did a little cocktail napkin math, and our percentage of a 75-25 cost share on that was going to be around $107,000. And I mean, there's no way that one of us ranchers would be able to stomach that, in a year. So just so you know, but it's prime wildlife habitat. It's prime sage-grouse habitat. Maybe there's some NGOs and stuff that could be brought in to help mitigate some of the cost of this stuff. But it is daunting for all of us, and it will be for a while too, as Megan alluded to. You know, next spring is going to be our really difficult point for us. We lost all of our infrastructure where we usually have our heifers and everything. So we've got to find someplace else to do everything. I don't have anything around my house except black for several miles, like 4 or 5 miles. So anyways, that's my statement.
Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Geez, sorry for your losses. I mean, yeah, I can't imagine what you're going through. Do you have any insurance? I know as a farmer over in Park County, my big hay stack yards, I would insure them in case of a lightning strike and burn, 1,000 ton of hay down. Do you guys have any insurances that can help you at all?
Go ahead.
We did have our hay insured, not to the extent of our loss. We don't typically carry that much hay over to the next year, but last year, being such a mild winter, we carried quite a bit more, probably roughly $45,000 worth of hay was in that stack, and we were insured for about 30. So we are learning that our blanket policy on the ranch had a lot of holes in it. It doesn't cover everything. We lost a bridge, an old bridge that was right next to our barn that we use extensively. And we lost a portion of that, and that's going to be very expensive to replace with the construction costs and everything the way they are these days.
Thank you. Go ahead if you want to comment.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as insurance goes, the grasslands are not covered. We do have some drought insurance for drought in the following years, but as far as fire, we don't. The only thing we have covered is our structures and hay around our headquarters, but grass, fence, none of that is covered. And so in our instance, the 98 miles of fence, we're looking at over $1.5 million for us as landowners to replace. And it's just not doable. Thanks.
Senator Hicks.
So, Madam Chairman, it appears to be one of the issues in a situation like this is obviously you can't bear the cost in a single year. Nobody's got $1 million just sitting around an account. What conversations have you had or you're contemplating having as far as looking at some type of long-term financing, low interest loans? If we get the emergency declarations, sometimes through USDA or FSA, those are available. But what do you see going forward as far as access to capital? Is this going to become a substantial limiting factor, your ability to continue to maintain your operations?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator and Chairwoman. We are learning that as we speak. We're sort of drinking from a fire hose at the moment. We've been to meetings with the FSA. We've done programs in the past with NRCS. And we're looking at all available options. A lot of what is available is coming in under what the bids for the fence is. So recent one that I heard today was that like the FSA would pay like $20,000 a mile for fence in rough terrain, which is predominantly what we have. Whereas some of these bids are coming in at like $31,000 a mile, which is just crazy to me. But yeah, we're looking into all of those avenues and trying to figure out what best suits our operation. There are always, as I'm sure you all know, strings attached to all that government money. If you're going to move a fence or you want to, maybe a fence was put in a long time ago and it wasn't exactly online and you want to with your neighbor, you want to put it back where it should be or whatever. If you're going to take that government money, you have to do an archaeological study, an environmental study, even on private land, just to get access to those federal funds. So it's weighing all of those issues and trying to figure out what best suits our operation. So the answer to your question is it's complicated.
Yeah, thank you. As far as capital goes and covering costs, without the help of cost sharing, we would go under. We would have to sell everything. At this point, we've been so busy moving cattle, getting day-to-day things done. It's still, we have no idea what we're gonna do for funding. I've heard there might be some no interest loans through local bank. And I know a lot of us still have land payments to make on property that we've purchased that has long-term payments associated with it, but how to pay for it all, unknown.
So, Madam Chairman, I think just
Go ahead.
some of the things that we've contemplated in the past is, and you know, if you've had the opportunity to serve on Capital Finance Committee and appropriations over the years, we've had different programs available through the state of Wyoming. That's something that this committee may or may not want to explore. One of the ones that we just did some reforms through the State Loan and Investment Board was young ag producer loans. But there's other things. Sometimes it's not as much as a low interest loan as looking at thing as guaranteeing to a local lender, the backing of the state on a low interest loans. But I'm just throwing out there's a number of tools that we have in the past. Now, keep in mind, anything that this committee or anybody else, even if it was an individual bill, was inclined to try to approach or even wouldn't be available until after effective immediately in March. But that's an option that maybe if the committee was interested, we could look at. And I understand right now it's just still an emergency response component, but the simple fact is you don't have millions in reserves. Access to capital is going to be important when you're looking at it, hundreds or millions of dollars in infrastructure replacement. So looking out, Madam Chairman, it's just something that maybe we should at our next committee bring in Office of State Lands and Investment and talk about what programs we have, what's out there, what's available. Do we just want to do expand a program, create a program, or just provide opportunities for guaranteed loans to local lending institutions at a certain rate? Anyway, those options are out there, something that we haven't explored, but obviously something we could if we are inclined to do so. But I just throw that out there for discussion, Madam Chairman, knowing that there's going to be a tremendous demand for capital.
Senator Larson.
Madam Chairwoman, I brings to mind a small business development. I think, didn't they have some loans for up in my area for the sugar beet growers and the alfalfa seed? So it might be advantageous to bring them into.
All right. Well, and I'm going to suggest we put a little working group together on this because I think that we need to come with some ideas to the next committee meeting rather than be trying to collect our thoughts in November. So I think that's where we're headed, but we really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here today. We know you've got a lot of work to do and you took time out of your busy schedule to be here. And the one thing about this that I have appreciated as we've gone through what we have in our area is the way our communities come together. So appreciate you being here. Senator Barlow, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Unfortunately, it's under these circumstances with the what you've just heard. And I want to compliment these two young people, and I've actually known them since they were quite young. Megan standing by the chute as I'm preg checking cows, probably wondering what the heck I'm doing to her family's cows. And Jake, long before he had young children, et cetera. So But they represent the future of agriculture right here. This is the future of agriculture in Northeast Wyoming. These two young people and their children who are also growing up in agriculture. And they're not the only ones. There's a lot of other young agriculturalists out there too. But there's a whole lot of them that are my age and older that are trying to figure out how to pass it to the next generation with some of the challenges that these incidences have provided. So if there are options or opportunities for us to be helpful to these young people, the future of agriculture, future of our community, I hope we can explore those. There's probably four things I want to point out. A couple off of what they made comment about, and then a couple off just of my own personal comments. And I was not affected by the fire. It burned the fence line on the south side and was a mile from me on the north side. So I don't live with what they're doing, what they're going through every day, but they're my neighbors and my friends. And so I try to share their burden. One of the things that's going on is these were such big fires that neighbors can lean on neighbors, but when your neighbors have also been affected, it keeps going. So we're very thankful that there's folks from all over the country, from out of state, et cetera, sending in loads of hay. I mean, there's a lot of help coming, but they're still dealing with it day to day. So I'll say a couple of things about, first of all, federal programs, timing, and the requirements that go with it. I was at the meeting last week. I think Representative Corrego and Commissioner Novotny put it together. These folks were there and many others, 40, 50, 60 people from Johnson County coming together as a community. How can we get this done? And there's just a lot of red tape. I think I heard that come earlier in the conversation today. I was listening online. There's just a lot of things these folks have to deal with to get that. And they are, looking out for their own families, their own businesses, et cetera. So I think there's some broader efforts that could be made to try to help coordinate some of that, and maybe some of what Director Budd was talking about through the FEMA stuff, maybe that helps with that, to kind of package things, if you will, so these large areas. The second thing I'm going to visit about is the insurance thing, the private insurance. So I'm on the corporations committee, and I'm just going to throw it out there. Right now, there are parts of the state of Wyoming where you cannot get wildfire insurance. You will not be covered for wildland fires. Now, that happens to be mostly in timbered areas, western and eastern right now. But this is, I think, something we're going to have to be paying attention to. Our insurance commissioner is looking at it. It's happening other places in the country as well. Think about some of the catastrophic fires that happened in California, et cetera, where now wildland fire, even if it were covered, which they're finding out maybe it wasn't covered, now it's actually being explicitly excluded. Explicitly excluded. So that is another challenge. While we have mechanism on the private market to deal with them, some of those may be going away. So that's another thing that at least your corporations committee is trying to pay attention to. Now, there are products out there that are specific to wildfire, but they have some other things. You have to have defensible spaces. You have to be able to do things, and those require potentially some modifications to our state statutes. So we're still learning, and I'll have this conversation with our state forester and our state fire marshal. But I think that there are maybe some things. But I do want to, at least from my community, and I feel like I'm part of this community, even though this is someone else's district. I grew up between both communities and work in both communities and care for both communities. We are thankful for the response of our fire departments, for the state forester, for the resources of all the cooperating agencies that came from really all over the country, for the Type 5 team that came in and held this public meeting, and for the efforts of our state forester, Ms. Norris, for meeting with elected officials, trying to get things. Did we ever understand everything? Are there things we could have done better and differently? Yes, and we're learning from those. But let's understand there were thankfully no lives lost. There was no primary residence lost. There were certainly buildings lost. There were certainly cabins on the back 40, things like that. But a lot of things went right. Is it still catastrophic to a person's livelihood and business? Absolutely. Does it have generational impacts potentially? Yes. But there was a lot of good things happen. What wasn't mentioned earlier this morning, at least in the previous testimony, was greater sage grouse. A lot of what this burned in this area and in my area was either current core area or potential core area. So we have that as far as when we start talking about invasive species and things like that. So there are some other things. I am authorized to shout out a specific thank you from our fire chief and deputy fire chief to Ms. Norris, State Forestry and all their work, and to the legislature for the FSA. Because even though we're a community that has a fairly robust fire department, these things are outside of the realm that we could handle. Certainly, I think Johnson County would say the same. A few things that have happened, as you know, state tries to respond in a meaningful way. Livestock Board lifted some inspection requirements for movement of cattle in state. And the YDOT, and through the governor's office, issued a executive order for movement of cattle and feed in and out of the state. Some of it was done in a blizzard a couple of years ago, and hopefully that impacts, other areas too. I understand there's a fire burning right now in Hot Springs County. I hope that's getting under control quickly. Anyway, Madam Chairman, there's several other things that I would speak to. I know you're in your lunch hour, but thank you for your time and attention to this. I look forward to a working group that maybe if Representative Craig, or soon to be Senator, currently Representative Crago, could have some of these local resources kind of come to the table with a working group to kind of share their experiences. Obviously, your community has some folks who would have some interest in that as well. It may be something that is a couple members from the committee try to bring this together with fire departments, et cetera, that we might get to some places we understand and can be most helpful. So with that, Madam Chairman, I'd stand for any questions. I again compliment these young people for their caring enough to be here and their continuing caring. And I hope we can do what we can from where we have opportunities to make sure they have a legacy in agriculture in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions or comments? Right, seeing none, thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. With that, I would take volunteers to join me on this working group. Senator Crago, soon to be Representative Eklund. Anyone else want to join us? Senator Hicks. So we have a committee of 4. If someone else decides they want to join us, let me know. And we will begin to tackle this issue along with the executive branch. With that, it looks like the time is now 12:32. We have a few more items of business this afternoon. I think I'll give us until 2 o'clock just so we can have a nice lunch. Would that be all right with everyone? All right. We'll be adjourned until 2 o'clock when we'll take up our next order of business. Thank you.